Welcome into an extra edition of the Oxford Exxon podcast. I'm Neal McCready. Today on the show, I'm joined on the Campbell Clinic hotline by three guests as we get you ready for Saturday's showdown in Athens between number 10 Ole Miss and number 1 Georgia. First up, it's Mike Griffith of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. No one knows the SEC better than Mike. He's been on the Bulldogs beat for most of the Kirby Smart era. And we stay in Athens and visit with Radi Nabulsi, the publisher of UGAsports.com, one of the best sites on the Rivals Network. Then we have our weekly visit with Barstool Sports' Ben Mintz, this time from the new Barstool offices in downtown Chicago. Please make the Oxford Exxon and Blue Sky a part of your football weekend. Stop by the Oxford Exxon on Highway 6 West in Oxford. You can fill up outside, grab some ribs and snacks inside. You can also check out their fantastic beer cooler. It's 34 degrees of sudsy goodness. I'm coming to you from the Clark Ford Studios. 662-257-1900 is the number. Clark Ford there in Amory, Mississippi. Call our friend Corey Clark. Tell Corey what Ford product you're looking for. He'll send you a quote within 15 minutes in business hours. It's right to the bottom line. There's no hassle. There's no haggle. You get your quote, and the rest is completely up to you. You can shop that quote around, or you can do what I've done, what I recommend that you do, and that is hop into a Clark Ford today. 662-257-1900. All guests join on the Campbell Clinic hotline. The Campbell Clinic is in Oxford now, 2608 South Lamar Boulevard, Suite 102, just across the street from the cottages at Hooper Hollow. The Campbell Clinic provides full-service orthopedic care, everything from sports medicine to foot and ankle surgery to spine and total joint care to pediatric orthopedics, physical therapy, and more. To book an appointment, go to campbellclinicoxford.com or call 901-759-3111. Walk-ins always welcome at the Campbell Clinic, Monday through Friday, 7:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. We're also presented by Twisted Tea. Are you ready to elevate your college football game day experience? Check out Twisted Tea, your go-to game day beverage for college football fans. Twisted Tea is unlike any hard beverage you've had before. It's made with real brewed tea, packs a flavorful punch, 5% alcohol, no carbonation, delivering the perfect balance of taste and refreshment that goes down smooth for every game day occasion. There's no need to settle for the usual. Twisted Tea turns up any occasion, especially when you're cheering for your favorite team. So whether you're tailgating in the stadium parking lot, watching at a bar, or hosting friends at home, Twisted Tea is there to elevate game day experience. It perfectly complements your love for college football, your passion for creating unforgettable moments. So let's toast, to unforgettable game day experiences with Twisted Tea, the drink that fuels fun and celebrates your love for college football. Keep it twisted. Now here's Mike Griffith of the AJC on the Campbell Clinic hotline. Mike Griffith, my longtime friend from the AJC. There's nobody more connected in SEC circles. Mike won't say that. I'll tell you that. It's absolutely the truth. He should be on the SEC network. He's on a lot. He should be one of the faces of the SEC network. Mike, welcome into the show. Really appreciate your time here this morning. How are you?
Good, Neal. Thanks, man.
All right, let's dive into this because I find this Georgia team, this program, to just be absolutely fascinating. They're doing historic stuff in an era when it feels to me, I was just working on a question. I'll set it up this way. I was working on a question I do a mailbag every week at rebelgrove.com. And one of the questions was basically kind of like, in this era of college football with the portal and all of that, are we going to have to recalibrate the way we look at seasons, expectations, that kind of thing? And my answer was yes, I think so. I think it's going to be more NFL-like. It's going to be more parity. There's going to be less variance between great and good and mediocre. Just because you won a few years ago doesn't mean you'll win now. Just because you win now doesn't mean you'll win in a few years. It's going to be a little more NFL-like with parity, and yet Georgia's dominating. 26 straight wins, 42 out of 43 out of 44. They haven't lost at home in 5 seasons. It's incredible stuff in an era when that's just not the norm. How has Kirby Smart been able to do this, and not only that, but to sort of buck the trend of, hey, you win big and then you drop a couple?
Well, I mean, he has created a culture here, and you got to give him credit for that. Kirby's ability to relate and motivate his players. I do think the fact that Kirby's a former player and he's got street cred with these guys, so when he gets on their ass, they listen. If Kirby calls you out on the microphone, you might be upset, but that's a guy you want to impress him because you know that Kirby has coached fantastic players, not just at Georgia. I remember he was at Nick Saban's side for four of those Alabama titles in the 9 years he was there. I mean, this is a guy who's coached up the best in the NFL, frankly, and coached up Alabama's best defenses and helped build that team that won 26 in a row before the kick six at Auburn, or excuse me, the won back-to-back titles and was on their way to a third national title before the kick six at Auburn, and then later won 26 in a row as part of a staff that Kiffin was on. In 15 and 16, Kirby left the second year, but he recruited all those guys and coached them up and turned it over to Jeremy there. And so the kids know. I mean, this is a guy with credibility. I mean, if Kirby tells you you're elite, you're elite. If Kirby tells you you suck, you suck. And when you've got that sort of, I would imagine it's the same with Lane and his quarterbacks. Like I can see Jackson Dart wants to emulate Lane Kiffin. He thinks Lane is a cool guy. And Lane is a cool guy. His sideline demeanor is amazing. But Kirby is a guy that kids want to play for. They know he's connected to the NFL. So that's part one, right? I think part two is they've had some special guys. And I go back to last year, and there were two plays Brock Bowers made. There was this incredible juggling catch off of a Florida guy that it should have been an interception, and instead it's a 70-yard. I mean, Stetson Bennett lived a charmed life at Georgia. Guys made him look really good. Now, Stetson could run every now and then and extend plays, but if we're being honest, he was a very ordinary talent at quarterback in the SEC, but he was surrounded with terrific talent, and Stetson took on the ego and the confidence of a great. And you know how much that can mean. But in terms of just talent, there's a reason why Stetson Bennett had no Power Five offers. None. He was going to go play for Billy Napier at Louisiana. And he got an 11th hour call to come to Georgia on signing day because they couldn't find anybody else to back up Jake Fromm. And then, Stetson's story took off. He perseveres, he impresses in practice, he makes clutch plays, yada, yada, yada. But while we're talking about him all of last year, because the announcers are just in love with a quarterback, they got to tell you that, and then you find out, well, wait a minute, this guy's not exactly okay, well, that's a whole nother story. And then the MVP, oh, he was voted MVP. No, he wasn't. They never picked up the ballots in the press box. The MVP was who TV wanted for the interview. That was the story they were going to get. Was he really the most valuable player on Georgia's team? No. Jalen Carter was last year. Number 88 was an absolute wrecking ball. He was a destroyer. He was a 12th man on defense. You could not block him. You could not block him when he wanted to play. And Tennessee found that out. Hendon Hooker said, this guy knows what I had for breakfast. We're halfway through the first quarter. He's smelling my breath. I mean, unbelievable, right? Offensively, Brock Bowers. This matrix play that he had, and I wish I would have sent you a picture so you could have put it up. And you may remember the play, you may not, but there was a fourth down play against Ohio State where he contorts his body and reaches for somehow, like he should be out of bounds. Like your body is not supposed to bend like this. But he reaches, and on replay, it gets overturned and they get the first down and they complete the comeback from 2 scores down. You're like, that shouldn't have happened. I mean, if that play doesn't happen, Georgia does not beat the Ohio State. They don't. The year before, he was just as impressive. He was a guy that nobody could cover. Nobody had any answers for. And it was worse than a wide receiver because a wide receiver is just one guy out wide. Brock can play in line and block you also. So now what do? Because if you go small with safety, he's going to run somebody over and they're going to run the ball effectively. If you go big with linebacker, he's going to run away. So it was an absolute, and oh, by the way, there was another tight end on the field who was 6'8" and 280 pounds and plays in the NFL named Darnell Washington. And he was a 5-star, amazing talent who could literally collapse one side of the line with his blocking. But if you didn't, and this guy, this dancing bear has some gloves. I mean, he could catch everything. So you had to oh my God, there's 2 of them. What do you got 6'8", 280 over 6'7", 280, whatever your measurement of the day was. You got this guy over here who's so big that we have to put somebody big on him, but he'll run away. So we got maybe safety help in the red zone. Then you got this guy over here, and then you got this guy in the backfield who was probably the most underrated guy. And I'm trying to think of the Ole Miss guy There were 3 guys that had over 500 yards receiving and 800 yards rushing, and one of them was Dexter McCluster. I'm glad I'm doing this show because Ole Miss fans can appreciate Dexter McCluster. A lot of other SECs, oh, who was that? Like, no, you don't remember, do you? I remember Dexter McCluster. This guy was a jumbo David Palmer for the old Alabama fans, but this guy had juice. Still, in today's NFL, Dexter McCluster is a PPR fantasy football dream. This guy was unbelievable. He was the Percy Harvin of the SEC West. And so there was Percy Harvin, and there was Dexter McCluster that did this. And then there was Kenny McIntosh. This guy's really good. Kenny did not drop a pass in 4 years at Georgia. Did not. And he could run. And he carried him to victories at Missouri when Stetson was struggling. And he carried him at Kentucky when Kirby, turned off the pass game the whole second half, except for one throw. I mean, you had a bona fide Marshall Faulk type of back. Now, he's not Marshall Faulk in the NFL yet, but stay tuned. Fantasy people that do these, what are they called when you draft these guys early and you can keep them forever? It's the guy you want to keep. But they had this great running back. Yeah, you had a great running back. Brock Bowers. You had Darnell Washington. These 3 really first round, first pick over there, left tackle Broderick Jones. No, forget your pass rush. It's not happening today on the blind side. You had all these and what do all these guys have in common, Neal? They're not going to play Saturday. Okay, they had all of these guys, and it was an incredible offense. And then defensively, we talked about Jalen Carter. How about 5 first-round draft picks off the 2021 defense? Not the whole team, the defense. 5 first. You had Jordan Davis, Outland Trophy winner. You had Jalen Carter. You had 3 first-round picks at defensive tackle. Then you had the number 1 overall pick at defensive end, who, by the way, was a third-team All-SEC guy because he didn't put up enough sacks, and media people often will look at the numbers and go, oh, he's got the most sacks, he must be good, or he must have the most tackles. Yeah, those guys always have the most tackles at Vanderbilt and Kentucky. They're always on the field, okay? Tackle numbers are not equate to great players, especially on the defensive line where your job is gap assignment, force to play outside, let your linebackers clean up. So they've had some really – Nolan Smith, another first-round pick on the other end. I mean, this defensive line – I always used to think and say that 93 Bama was the standard for defensive line play in SEC history. 2021 Georgia is the 85 Bears defense. Yes, they lost one game, just like the 85 Bears did to the Dolphins. Bryce Young that day, and Stetson was not good. He turned the ball over. But they were the 85 Bears of the SEC. The 2021 Bulldogs were really, really special. 2022 went undefeated, but I think they'd have lost by 2 touchdowns to 2021. But the SEC wasn't as good in 2021 or 2022. And you know what, Neal? It's not as good in 2023.
I agree completely.
Right? I mean, I'm looking at this Georgia team that's undefeated, and I'm thinking to myself, last year, how bad would they have gotten beat by last year's Georgia or the year before's Georgia? And don't even bring up 2019 or 2020. Was it 2019? 2019 LSU. Which to me was the best SEC team I've ever seen.
I agree.
So a lot of rambling from me. I'll bounce it back to you. Players is the answer. Kirby is the answer. Culture is the answer. But we're going to take this conversation in another direction. I got a feeling as far as what's next.
So this is not a knock on Georgia at all. None. Georgia doesn't make its schedule. The SEC gives Georgia a schedule, and they're in the East. And except for Missouri, they belong. I mean, who belongs in the West geographically? It makes the Georgia plays who's in the East. They didn't lay out the map years ago. There's a criticism, and I think you see it reflected in the CFP rankings. And when I say criticism, it's very small. It's in quotes. Sure. That hey, they haven't really been tested. They haven't really played a good team. Maybe Missouri, who Georgia beat last week, 30-21 in Athens, is the best team they've played so far this season. That's not Georgia's fault if it's the case. They didn't make the schedule again, but they haven't played Alabama. They didn't play LSU. They haven't played Tennessee yet. They've played Missouri, and they're about to play Ole Miss. Is it possible that with this particular team, and I mean this with all due respect to Georgia, because I've had them number one in my. I don't have a poll. I don't have a vote. People like me can't have a ballot. We're way too biased. But I would have Georgia number one. I would have them number one until someone knocked them off. Period. Is it possible, though, that this team has been able to hide some warts and such because it hasn't really been tested by an elite team?
For sure. And what happened with that deal is they were supposed to play at Oklahoma in the first game of a home and home with Oklahoma. But when Oklahoma and Texas made the decision to join the SEC, and Sankey denies this. He just, for the record, Greg Sankey tells me this discussion never happened, but I have a hard time believing it. Um, so they would have played Oklahoma, which I believe is Big 12 is Fox. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so they would have played Georgia at Oklahoma. It would have been a Fox game this year. There would have been no return game with Oklahoma as a Big 12 member to the SEC. To me, that is a business imbalance. We're going to give you an SEC team for your network, but we're not going to get that Big 12 game back. So I think part of it was, and when Georgia does play Oklahoma, it's going to be a conference game. It's not the same as an even trade in a non-conference home and home. Now, Neal, I think that Georgia could have been more proactive and said, let's play that game. And I don't know this. Maybe these conversations happened. Georgia's got a really good AD. This is another part of their magic right now. This Josh Brooks guy was actually an equipment manager. This is the guy you got to work on your show in the offseason. I think you'd like it. He was actually an equipment manager for Nick Saban at LSU and went on to become an administrator. I think he went through one of the Louisiana schools there as an administrator before he worked as Mark Richt's director of football ops, and he left. He came back, and now he's the AD, and he's younger. I think he's 42, 43. But Josh is savvy. At some point, if you're Kirby Smart, look, you opened last year with Oregon, okay? You opened the year before with Clemson in Charlotte, which is like their second home because they play in Charlotte every year. And that was the number 2 defense in the country. Say what you want, but they hadn't lost it then. They were still Clemson. And you opened the last 2 years with really good mark and really good wins for the SEC, by the way. That's a great advertisement for the SEC.
100%.
Georgia kicking everybody to the side, dominate Michigan in the Orange Bowl and whatever, the 65-7 over, TCU, which beat Texas last year, by the way. Didn't allow them any offensive touchdowns either. Go figure. So they played some in the last couple of years. So maybe Georgia looks at it and goes, do we really want to play that one off? Does Georgia really need to prove anything at this point? And let's be honest, this is an Oklahoma team that was 5-7 last year.
Yes.
Coming in this year.
Yeah.
So the game, let's be completely honest about it. That game had lost some luster. That beating Oklahoma in week 2 this year really wouldn't have meant anything. Really, now we look, they beat Texas. Well, yeah, but we wouldn't have known that then. Beating Oklahoma would have meant nothing. There was no return game. And as it turned out, and again, you heard my conspiracy theory, but the true theory of what played out on paper is that the SEC office wrote Georgia a letter and said, you're not going to play this game. Now, there's other conversations that made me believe there might be a little bit more story. But the bottom line is, if Georgia beat Oklahoma, I don't know that the conversation would be that much different right now. I mean, Oklahoma just lost to Oklahoma State. Oklahoma's got 2 losses. Yeah, they beat Texas. But there's questions about them. As for some of the other teams, look, Auburn has been their annual opponent. That's you covered Auburn. That was not an easy draw these last 20 years. I mean, Gus Malzahn was pretty damn good. He beat Nick twice, and they beat Georgia when they were number 1 in 2017. So having Auburn as an annual opponent, I mean, I would argue that only Alabama, LSU was kind of roller coaster, but Auburn right there with LSU in terms of, annually when you think about what teams wouldn't you want to play every year, Auburn's pretty tough. And, Cam Newton did a pretty nice job there for a minute, right? I mean, so they've had a tough crossover game. Florida, has dropped off. What can you say? When they had Urban Meyer and Tim Tebow, nobody was talking about how easy the East was. Tennessee, when Philip Fulmer was appearing in 6 SEC title games in his 16 year, nobody was talking about Tennessee being an easy team.
For sure.
Kentucky has gotten better. I'm not one of these people that thinks Kentucky's ever going to be anything but a basketball school, but that's not an easy game. They've become the Mississippi State of the East in the sense of you may beat them, but you're going to feel it next week. I mean, I'll say that for the Maroon Bulldogs. I don't know. I may be the only one that calls them that because I cover Georgia, but I'll say that for the Maroon Bulldogs. When you play the Maroon Bulldogs, you're going to feel it. I don't know what scoreboard's going to say, but those guys are going to hit you. They do. That's a physical program. So in Kentucky, you play Kentucky, and it's going to be they're going to ugly it up. It's going to be a pain in the ass. It's no fun to go up to Kroger Field and when it's cold or really anytime. I'm not a fan of ever going up there, and I guess unless you like horses or something. But so and even Vanderbilt this year. Listen, and not because I think the Vanderbilt's anything and hasn't been since Jordan Rodgers was there, but just dealing with that stadium. They dressed in a tent, and the Vanderbilt hurt their best player. It just just what a stinky trip that was. I mean, there's people that. The people that think Nashville's nice now, I feel bad for you. There was a time it really was nice. There was a time you really could navigate that city and enjoy it. Now it's like you can have it. Number one, I can't afford it. Number two, I don't want to be in it for 5 minutes. Everything's turned upside down. There's cranes everywhere, and people who aren't from the South trying to act like they're from the South. It's a terrible scene. It's Myrtle Beach meets country music or something. I don't know. I mean, sorry, I apologize to any Myrtle Beach fans that may be in the audience. But there's just so even though you say the East is easy to listen, Shane Beamer, South Carolina, hey, they were beating Georgia by 10 points this year, Neal. Spencer Rattler's a pretty good quarterback.
Rattler's really good. Rattler's really good. Yeah.
Yeah, and early on, they still had all their hope, and it's like the Daytona 500. Everybody still thinks they can win a championship. South Carolina still thought they were good then, so they were dangerous. Therefore, they were. The Stetson Bennett principle. And Rattler played fantastic, and Beamer had a great scheme, and they're beating Georgia at halftime. So you say that, and then what they do last year, they beat Tennessee and Clemson. So how easy is the East again? So my point is, it's not as easy as it looks. And I do think a lot of the West reputation comes off of Nick Saban, in Alabama. Oh, it's Nick, talking about this and Nick. I mean, look, this is where I upset your crowd for the first time. Sorry, apologies. I had this argument on Atlanta Talk Radio yesterday. All right. And now I have grown into a Lane Kiffin fan. I like Lane on Twitter. I like talking to him at the spring meetings. I know that was outside of his comfort zone to stand there in front of 10 people and actually talk in human terms.
1,000,000% he hates it.
You know what, Neal? He did a fantastic job. Even though I think he knows he needed to do that, you can't just be a caricature and a Twitter icon. At some point, you've got to be a real person. And Lane Kiffin showed up as a voice of reason and a real person at SEC spring meetings. And my respect for him doubled. Now, Lane's got a past, and Tennessee fans know it, and I know it, and the Lexus dealership knows. There are things that happen. Look, and he was under one of the biggest microscopes of the world. I mean, look, you got a good-looking, clever football coach that the world loves. They gravitate. Let's be honest. Women love Lane Kiffin. They absolutely adore the guy because he's funny and he's behind the podium, he's what a coach is supposed to look like. If you were doing a college TV show, I'm casting Lane Kiffin. That's who I want. That's the movie star right there. And he's smart and funny, and his offenses are explosive, and he's really been around. You look at his resume, my gosh, he coached the Raiders, he's been with USC, he's been at Tennessee, he's done it the hard way at FAU. He's doing really, I think, unprecedented things, modern era, unprecedented things at Ole Miss.
Yeah.
And so I've become this, like I said, I'm like, you know what? There's a lot of things about Lane I didn't like early in his career, but he's winning me over now. I love that he stayed at Ole Miss. I love that he makes Ole Miss relevant and vice versa. It's a great match. It's a great brand. I've got a hat that's like light blue and red. People are like, that's an Ole Miss hat. It was like from this Onward Reserve store. And I'm like, well, let me get it. All right.
The Mike Griffith show, everybody.
I just like this hat. Now it says Onward Reserve on there, okay? Yeah. It doesn't say Ole Miss. Yeah. But I can't wear this without catching. Oh, you got your Ole Miss hat on. No, I just like it. So I've turned into this old, I like Ole Miss. But Lane hadn't really won many big games. He hadn't really beaten it. Okay, well, what's his big win? Well, he beat LSU this year. Okay, well, LSU's got 3 losses now.
Yeah.
It's not as impressive as it was. Neal, that could change Saturday night.
Okay, so this is where I think this is interesting. My friend Parker Fleming, Stats of War on Twitter, I thought he had a great quote. He does his computers put out these super advanced, way too complicated for me graphs, but included in them are some basic things. And boiling it down, he has Georgia winning by 3.5 points on Saturday. His computers do, not him, his computers. And so someone kind of challenged him with, hey, how? Well, it doesn't make sense. The line's 10, 11. A lot of other computer projections are 10, 11. One computer projection has Georgia winning by 24 points. I mean, there's a lot there. And Parker's quote that kind of struck me was, look, Georgia's good. Georgia's really good. But Georgia analytically is not the flying death machine that it has been the last 2 years.
Right.
It's human. You mentioned South Carolina. They were tied with Auburn, I think, in the fourth quarter. Missouri led in the third quarter last week. What would Ole Miss have to do to A, put it into a fourth quarter game, and then B, to win it?
Well, they've trailed in 5 out of their 6 SEC games, okay? And they've given up touchdowns on the opening drive in the last 3 games. That's very un-Kirby-like. It's almost as if these teams study Georgia in the offseason or something, right? Of course they do.
Of course
right?
they do. Spend a lot of time on them.
And when you're number one, that's what happens.
For 2 reasons, right? It's not just because you're going to play them. That's idiotic. It's not that Lane Kiffin and company spent the summer studying Georgia because, hey, on November the 11th, baby. No, a lot of it is, hey, what are they doing? What can we emulate? What can we take? What are teams that are having success against them doing? Because we might be able to use that against Alabama or LSU or Auburn or Arkansas or whatever. And so, yeah, people, when you're the best, and Georgia is the best, when you're the best, people study you a lot. And then by studying you, they're like, hey, did you notice this? And hey, if you do this, and look, they did this, and you start piecing some things together, and yeah, you have a pretty effective script early in games.
Think about this. This was interesting. Kirby revealed this last night, and I enjoy covering Kirby. I know that from the outside, he probably doesn't look like a lot of fun. He likes to argue with you. He's very combative. When I told him he was going to have 15 players drafted 2 years ago, he challenged me openly and said if he was wrong, I could call him a liar. I still haven't done that, by the way. But he likes to get combative and fight, and that's fun for me because I think it's funny because I know what he's doing. He's controlling his narrative. But this is what he released last night. So him and Lane share information. They share GPS numbers. They and if you're in that and I know this from texting with Kirby, your text had better be pretty good if you're going to get one back. This guy has no time for fools. This guy has no time for anything that doesn't help him win or serve him in life. And think who does? I mean, do you think the president? Well, that's probably a bad example. But there's people. How much time do successful people really make for distractions? Okay.
Yeah.
Kirby doesn't make any. The fact that he's networking with Lane Kiffin, and when Kirby says and he said it more than once, you always say, well, coaches always say, no, I can tell the difference. Kirby really likes Lane. There really is a genuine respect. These guys sat in meetings next to one another. There's probably time, Lane's probably a pain in the ass. I'm sure Kirby didn't like the graphic of him on Saban's lap. I'm sure that fired him up. But that was good for Georgia fans because a fired up Kirby Smart is a good Kirby Smart, right? If the media doesn't do it, let Lane do it. Someone's going to do it. He's going to find a lump in his oatmeal one day, one way or another. I can tell you that. Every day he's going to find a reason to have to prove something. But I'm going somewhere with this. So the fact that he networks and talks with Lane, right, an opposing SEC coach. You know who the last SEC coach was that he used to talk with like that and share information with? He's on the staff right now. His name's Will Muschamp.
Oh.
Do you know what common thread Lane Kiffin could have with Will Muschamp Saturday night?
Will actually beat Kirby.
He's the last one to beat Kirby. He came into Sanford Stadium. Now it took a lot. It took their field goal kicker missing 2 field goals. It took Jake Fromm throwing 3 picks. He hadn't thrown one all year. It took South Carolina having a bye week the week before. And as far as those picks, they really weren't even on Jake. It was just Georgia's terrible receivers. It took a lot.
Yeah.
But it happened. And by the way, Eli Drinkwitz's Appalachian State team would later beat that. That was not a good South Carolina team. They had a really good defensive tackle. I'm trying to think of his name. He's in the NFL. He's a dude. Georgia center was out that game. The guy was a one-man wrecking crew that day. Blew their snaps up all day. But it took a lot. 20-17. Okay, it's the only time Georgia has lost a game when allowing 20 points or less out of the entire time Kirby's been here. Okay, so that's a stat to think about. Surely Ole Miss will get 20. I mean, they didn't against Alabama, but as you said, this is a different Ole Miss team in terms of their health, and that's another thing I would point to. For all the metrics and numbers, how many of those metrics and numbers include Brock Bowers in the lineup? He's only missed the last 2 games. How many of those metrics and numbers include Jamon Dumas-Johnson? You might say, well, that's not a household name. Well, he was one of the 3 Butkus Award finalists last year, and he was an All-American, and he's the quote-unquote heart and soul of their defense, and he ain't out there now. He's got hurt his forearm, broken bones in his forearm, and if he goes out there, I mean, he's not going to be. You can't play with a broken forearm middle linebacker when you got to take on blocks. Try to tackle Quinshon Judkins with one arm. Good luck, right? So they're missing their best offensive player. They're missing arguably their most important defensive player. On a defensive front, that I just told you, they don't have Jalen Carter anymore. They don't have Nolan. They don't have any. I look at their defensive line. I'm trying to do. They got any first rounders? None that are frontline. Maybe this Michael Williams. He's got 2.5 sacks this year. He was a freshman All-American, but they don't really have. I mean, they're still very good, Neal. They're just not. Look, Missouri won the trenches last week. Say what you want about Missouri. They're a respectable team, and that's kind of what the discussion that's gone on over here is. Well, is Missouri better? Who's better, Missouri or Ole Miss? I asked that question last night at media, and people were going to go back and forth. Well, Missouri. So the consensus was Missouri's got a better defense, a better defensive front, but Ole Miss has Lane Kiffin and Jackson Dart.
I think Ole Miss is a little bit. I think Ole Miss, and I like Brady Cook, by the way. I think Ole Miss is better at quarterback. I think Ole Miss is more diverse offensively. I think Missouri is better on defense than Ole Miss is. I don't think there's much question about that. The interesting thing with Ole Miss's defense, Mike, is this is Pete Golding's first year. He came in January and looked around basically and said, no, And they added 20-plus guys out of the portal on defense. I mean, they just cleaned house. He basically said, this just doesn't work. No. And they brought in all these pieces, and I don't know that there's a ton of NFL talent. They've got a bunch of guys who are good. They've got a bunch of guys who have bought into – this is the hardest part of coaching, I think. It's one of the interesting things. They got a bunch of guys to talk about – to buy into roles, playing roles that maybe they had a bigger role at – like Isaac Ukwu had a bigger role at James Madison than he has here. But the role that he has at Ole Miss, he's perfected it. Jared Ivey has really blossomed at defensive end, former Georgia Tech player. He's really given them a presence on the edge, but he's not that elite NFL pass rusher that you talk about. He's super smart, great leader. They've gotten some of that. They're not very deep at linebacker. Their linebackers play well, but they don't have that elite SEC speed that you want at linebacker. Same thing at safety. Their corners are solid, but they're not. Nobody's a lockdown corner, and yet Pete's kind of made it. He's made it work since LSU. LSU just obliterated them, just destroyed them. But since then, they've been pretty solid. Now, they haven't played a team as talented on offense as Georgia. And A&M had their moments in the second half, 3 second-half touchdowns with Max Johnson at quarterback. Arkansas led in the fourth quarter. KJ Jefferson put together a drive that had Lane not hitting the panic button, but hitting the, hey, we got to do something. Ole Miss on its subsequent drive, 4th and 1 at its own 34 against Arkansas, down 3 with about 10 minutes to go in the game. Lane Kiffin goes for it. I mean, you don't get it there, you might lose to Arkansas right there. And but they got it. Went down the field, scored, got a stop, scored again, ball game. They're a team that is, I think what's interesting to me, when you were talking about Georgia playing 2021 Georgia, I'd love to watch a game between 2021 Ole Miss, that 10-2 team, and 2023 Ole Miss. I think 2021 Ole Miss is more talented. I think 2023 Ole Miss is much tougher, much more resilient, much more uh, configured together. Offense and defense match one another, complement one another. 2021 Ole Miss was, hey, Matt Corral and these offensive weapons, and they're going to go score a bunch of points. And then on defense, man, I mean, maybe at some point they'll stop somebody, maybe not. And then at the end of the year when Corral was hurt, the defense stopped everybody, and offense was just trying to figure out a way to score a point here and there, just to hang on and to win a game. This team has more synergy, if you will. So what does that mean against a team like Georgia on the road in that environment that I think is going to be insane Saturday night? I don't know. Yeah,
Let's
I
talk,
don't know.
let's talk matchups. Let's talk, because here's where my mind goes. I think Ole Miss is a really difficult matchup. A really, and from the beginning, my thought was that this wouldn't be the toughest game, because I thought by now there'd be some attrition. I thought, well, Ole Miss is going to have some guys hurt by then, and they're just not as deep as other teams. And so it'll be a beat up Ole Miss. And, last year didn't help Lane's image any. Would they lose the last 4 or 5 games or something like that?
5 of the last 6, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was quite a fade. They were in the top 10, and then all of a sudden they were nobody. And you're like, oh, well, that's Ole Miss.
They were 8 and
Well,
1 at this point last year, and then they
yeah.
lost every game the rest of the way, right.
Well, like you said, this team's different though. This team strikes me as different. Jackson Dart strikes me as a lot more comfortable in the offense and knowledgeable about what he's doing, and certainly the dynamics of a coach-quarterback relationship in year 2. I mean, look at the difference between Stetson Bennett in 21 and 22. He was a different guy. I'm not one of these people that say build a statue, but he was damn good when he needed to be in 2022, and he played some really good football. He improved his passing game and all that. But getting back to this matchup, this is why I think Ole Miss has a chance. I believe they're either first or second in the SEC in fumble recoveries. Is that right? Where are they at in turnover ratio, Neal?
I can
Check
pull
that out for me, because Georgia has only forced like one fumble this year, and they've recovered, and that was last week. So they're not forcing a lot of turnovers. They're getting some interceptions, but they're playing a quarterback in Jackson Dart that's really good at taking care of the football. I don't think he's going to have a Brady Cook moment and throw it to the defensive tackle like Missouri did last week with the game on the line. Missouri's driving. They ran 3 plays to get to midfield. They're coming back, and if they score a touchdown, they take a lead midway through the fourth quarter, and their quarterback gets pressured, and Brady Cook shows you why he's Brady Cook and throws it back across his body, and the defensive tackle catches it. And it's like that was one of the biggest gaffes I've ever seen in a bit that stopped Missouri from having any chance. So there you go, Eli Drinkwitz. What do you got to do to get better? You got to get a better quarterback. This kid's good. You've taken him as far as he can go, but he had a Brady Cook moment. So I'm going to go with turnover differential. It's going to be big in this game. And can Ole Miss win +2 or more? Did you locate that stat there on the?
I'm looking for it. The SEC, to their credit, they give us a ton of stats, and
Yeah. It's like going. Yeah, I know. It's like going through.
I'm not complaining about all the information they give us, but boy, you have
It's
to
hard. It's hard to sort out.
find it.
So the fact that Ole Miss takes care of the ball, number one, because Georgia does not beat themselves. Okay, that's the first thing you got to know. I know I referenced the 2019 loss to South Carolina where they did beat themselves, but they haven't since, and that's why they've won 24 in a row, which ties the school record, which was set between 80 and 83 when a guy named Herschel Walker was still playing here. So they've tied their. That's about the only school record they haven't broke yet. If they win, they'll break it. If they beat Ole Miss, they'll break their home stadium mark. So the fact that Dart takes care of the ball, 1, 2, that Ole Miss forces turnovers, and if they're +2 in turnover ratio, gives them a great chance. And then 3, you've got to be able to run the ball. You've got to be able to have some balance, and you've got a fantastic running back that can do that. This guy Corey Schrader from Missouri was unbelievable. I mean, he went for 112 yards. I think that was the first 100-yard rusher against Georgia since Kentucky's Chris Rodriguez during the pandemic year of 2020. I think you got to go back to Najee Harris to see a game that Georgia lost largely because of a run game. And is Judkins in Najee Harris's league talent-wise? I think he is. I think his freshman year, it was the most rushing yards by a freshman since Herschel Walker, in the SEC at least, in 1980. So the formula, Neal, is to get ahead, which the last 3 teams that have played Georgia have done, or it's 5 out of the 6 teams that Georgia's played in the SEC have done. Get ahead, get momentum. Pete's defense, like you said, maybe not a lot of talent, but a lot of attitude. And you can play reckless and you can fly around and you can take chances if your offense is having success. And they've got to rattle Carson back. And he's been rattled a couple times. He's settled down and adjusted. Mike Bobo's done a good job. But if they can play with the lead and keep the hammer down, which Lane is smart enough to do. If you get a lead, you can't sit on it, especially in that stadium. Lane will keep the hammer down. Lane will go for it on fourth down with the lead if he needs to. That's the formula. Pull out all the stops. And I think you said earlier this week, I heard you on a podcast say, play with house money.
That's what Lane said.
Double.
When Lane said that, I thought, boy, this is interesting because I think and I think, by the way, for the record, I don't even think it's coach speak. I think he's right. And sometimes Lane says he doesn't do coach speak, and sometimes he'll do a little coach speak, and you're like, okay, well, that was coach speak. This is not coach speak. He's like kind of basically saying, look, nobody thought we were going to be here. We're here. People are doing this biggest game in program history, and he's kind of pushed back on that, like, well, I mean, not really, because look, if you win, it's a big win. But here's the thing, and by the way, I found your stat. Ole Miss has recovered 4 fumbles. They are 1 behind the conference leader. You probably wouldn't even guess who the conference leader is in fumble recoveries.
I'm gonna throw out Vanderbilt just because you gave me that clue.
It's Arkansas. Arkansas has recovered a league high 5. Ole Miss has recovered 4. So has Tennessee, Mississippi State, and Kentucky and Auburn. Georgia only has 1. Georgia is one of 3 teams in the league, joining Missouri and Texas A&M, who have no fumble return yards this year.
Yeah. It just hasn't happened. Last week was the first one. And again, if Ole Miss takes care of the ball and moves it with some success, which I think they will. I mean, Georgia's defense is good. I think the big thing that you can't account for in metrics or injuries or even our conversation is that culture, is that Georgia really believes they're going to win every game. And they play like that. They're very poised. When they get behind, there's nobody's worried. Nobody, I haven't felt like and just covering the team. And you've been in a lot of press boxes and covered a lot of games, and sometimes we kind of get a feel when the team's going to get beat. We have a sense about it when you've done it for 30 years. The last time I watched a game and just knew they were going to get beat was probably 2019 SEC championship game. And the last time I saw them truly get in that game, even Georgia had some opportunities. And Joe Burrow was just too much Joe Burrow. 2018 was the last time I saw somebody just go out there and thoroughly kick their ass. And LSU just dominated in Baton Rouge. I mean, they just wire to wire physically. Like, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Like, wow, I have never seen Georgia get beat up and pushed around like they did in Baton Rouge in 2018. Nobody knew who Joe Burrow was back then, by the way. I think he ran for 4 fourth downs. That dude, he's just a dude. To me, that
he's him, as the kids
he's
say.
legend. Yeah, he's you give me my choice of any SEC quarterback of the 2000s, maybe ever. I'm taking him. He was unbelievable.
And he had Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson.
Well, that helped. And Kirby told me that week he'd never seen a receiving group that good. And I said, wait a minute, never? I mean, that was the first clue when Kirby said, I've never seen guys like. I said, well, because that's just not Kirby. Kirby said about this game, this is a hell of a challenge. And Kirby has more than once talked about, like, Kirby knows what he's in for. Like, he knows this is a coach that knows his scheme. This is a quarterback that can make all the throws and has great poise and great knowledge of the system. I don't think you can fool Jackson Dart. I don't think George is going to throw anything at him that he hasn't already seen. He makes good decisions. You've got receivers that can win the 50-50s, but you've got that running back, man. I mean, you got that dog, that guy. I mean, you got a downhill guy that Georgia is going to need to swarm tag. It's going to be hard to get, one-on-one tag. Good luck. I mean, that's tough. When you've got a guy that you can hand the ball to on 2nd and 9, because I remember Todd Monken coming in here and explaining to us what creates explosive plays. And I want to say Ole Miss has like 110 plays of 15 yards or more. They're among the country's leader in explosive plays. And what makes for explosive plays is when you get the defense in something called run-pass conflict. And run-pass conflict is when you're far enough ahead of the sticks where it can be a run or a pass, which would be 2nd and 5, run-pass conflict. Are they going to run or are they going to pass? We don't know. Okay, 3rd and 2. Are they going to run? They're going to pass, especially with Lane. He'll go for it on 4 downs, right? You start falling behind 2nd and 10, 2nd and 12, 3rd and 8. There's no run pass conflict. We know what you're doing. But when you've got the defense and run pass conflict, that's what enables you to have explosive plays. That's how you can catch them guessing wrong because they have to guess. We don't know what you're doing. And there's no defense that covers everything and anything. And then at the end of the day, with a guy like Judkins, you can do everything right and have that safety right there, and he makes a miss or he runs over him. So that's the element that Quinshon Judkins brings. You can do everything right, and he can still make you wrong. I don't know that Georgia has a back like that. And they talk about Dejon Edwards, and look, he's a blue collar back. He kind of gets what's there, Neal. But he's not. I don't think he's going to be starting in the NFL. I don't. He's ain't DeAndre Swift, not Kenny Mack. And Kendall Milton was a fantastic recruit and has had some great moments. But since those pulled hamstrings in camp, I mean, he'll get you the first 7 or 12. But I don't think he's going more than 30. He doesn't have that home run speed. So Georgia doesn't have that back that they've had. They don't. The tight end game. I mean, they got this Oscar Delp kid. He's good, but he's not Brock Bowers. They got one explosive guy that you got to worry about. And everybody in the stadium is going to know who it is. It's number 84. It's Ladd McConkey, probably the most underrated guy. Because, again, we didn't talk about anybody but Stetson last year. This guy was their best receiver last year at over 1,000 total yards. And McConkey's been that guy. Bowers went out, and Ladd has had 2 really big receiving games. That's one guy. Who's going to be the other guy? The guy from Mississippi State, Ra Thomas. I mean, I don't know what Ole Miss people know about him, but he came here, he got in the doghouse, and it took him a minute to learn the offense. He's just now coming around, but he's a drop-off at the X. He's not as good as Adonai Mitchell was, right? And then the other transfer they got, Dominic Lovett from Missouri. I don't know, maybe Missouri gave out faster shoes in the equipment room, but this guy has not been what I thought he would be. I'm saying, how did he have all these yards receiving against, for Missouri? Because I don't see him doing that after the catch here. He's a good player. He's tough, but they've had slot guys like this before. This guy hasn't brought anything, over the top. I mean, he's been a solid transfer, but if we're going, and you brought this up earlier in the show, when we talk about how we're going to look at SEC, and this is going to really, forgive me if you're a subscription-based, recruiting site, but the transfer portal now is going to mean every bit as much, right? And you cover that too. That too. But the free agent acquisitions now are going to mean everything that, little Johnny that wore the Ole Miss wristbands on Friday nights. That means he's coming, okay? It's going to matter now what kind of car you put in this guy's driveway that's a junior, coming out of, UTSA, who can really play at the SEC level. Well, they offered him a Corvette. Well, they offered him a dealership, whatever. I mean, this is a whole, like, Lane, which is why Lane has brilliantly, right? He creates and I don't know that he did this on purpose. He creates a platform for himself on Twitter. First of all, I don't know that he did that knowing the value of it at the time. I think he's just a smartass who represents himself incredibly well on Twitter and witty and clever and timing and funny. He's just good at it. Like guys that draw cartoons, you meet him in person and you're a cartoonist and they're the most boring person in the world. But then they get in and they do the cartoons and they're hilarious and amazing. That's Lane on Twitter, right? He's amazing on Twitter.
100%.
So he's created huge social media. I tell you, it was a highlight. He retweeted one of my stories. I said, wow, I'm excited. I said, wait a minute. Am I fanboying Lane Kiffin because I got retweeted by Lane? Yes, I am. I am excited that I got retweeted by Lane Kiffin this week. I've never been excited to be retweeted by anybody. Why does this matter? I don't know, because he's Twitter king, right? So he created this platform, and then brilliantly, he uses the platform and the power to just stick it to Jimbo Fisher and A&M over this NIL stuff. Nick has a few words, and Nick and Jimbo, but meanwhile, Lane's just throwing the gas on the fire, man. I mean, and I'm writing it. I wrote all this stuff, because I do a lot of SEC stuff. And I'm like, oh, man, I said he put Jimbo in a tizzy. That was my favorite. Lane Kiffin's NIL comments put Jimbo Fisher in a tizzy.
It did.
Jimbo
lost it. Called him a clown. And then led to all that stuff. And then Jimbo wouldn't talk to him before the game last season in College Station. And this year Lane goes at midfield before the game. He comes up to Jimbo, and Jimbo suddenly could not talk to the equipment guy more than he was talking to the equipment guy. Had his body turned in such a way. And Lane just stood there and waited and finally kind of tapped him on the shoulder. And Jimbo was like, "Hey, I didn't know you were there." I'm like, "Oh, you knew he was there.
Yeah.
You knew he was there. He's in his head." And then, and afterwards, Lane's like, I really feel like Jimbo's they're on the cusp of a breakthrough. I mean, it's just, I'm like, dude, you're harassing him.
Well,
It is now.
but there's a point, but there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
There's a reason for that, Neal. It's not because he doesn't like Jimbo. It's because it's the reason everybody in the SEC should be scared to death of Texas come into the league, because they've got resources and money that none of the SEC schools have. You put together Georgia and Alabama's grant money, and it does not equal Texas. Texas has money like nobody else in their oil grants. Coach Stallings used to talk about that all the time when I covered Alabama back in the day. Of course, Coach Stallings was an A&M man, and he would talk about the state grants and how much more money Texas would get than A&M, and what boy, Alabama, Auburn, similar. But he would talk. This is scary. Texas has more money and more resources, and if they ever get anybody in there that knows what they're doing and can win with any sort of consistency, that program is going to take over the league with the money. If this turns into a money sport.
Can you imagine if Saban had taken that job back when it was rumored that he was taking that job? My God, he would have won so big there.
Who says he won't now? I mean, who says, if he goes anywhere, just a couple of years, just to. I mean, I don't rule out anything with Nick Saban, man. This guy, like you said, everybody keeps waiting for the drop off, and it doesn't happen. I mean, maybe his idea of the last 2 years of fun or something, but and the whole Texas thing, they turned into Texas again this year against Oklahoma, and Sark. I mean, we could, I don't know what to make of that. I mean, that's a tough situation. I'm not sold. I was a little surprised though to see Arch Manning go there. Disappointed more than surprised, just because I don't think it's a good fit. I know the idea was he'll go somewhere that's not in the SEC. Well, guess what? You're not playing anyway, so it doesn't matter. And I don't know that you really fit that offense. And where might he end up? Oh, I mean, I don't know. I mean, you tell me, Neal. There's all this talk that maybe the Mannings aren't high on Lane Kiffin, and that's why he's not at Ole Miss, or Peyton didn't like Georgia, and that's why. I don't really know. I mean, this guy's worth millions of dollars. There's people controlling his future. And let me ask you, is Arch Manning ultimately going to be a difference maker quarterback in the SEC? I don't know that either.
Yes,
so
too early to say.
Too early to say. Seems like a really nice kid, though.
Yeah.
But anyway, there's a lot of moving pieces. But getting back to Kiffin, he has been a part of college football's changes. He is at the forefront of it. Sankey embraces him. That tells you everything. Like, you could tell, and I don't want to talk too much about Greg Sankey. I got a lot of respect for Greg Sankey. First and foremost, you got to know, when I say this, I'm not trying to be a smart aleck, but he really is the smartest guy in the room. He sounds like the smartest guy in the room. He is the smartest guy in the room. Okay. And I really do have to look at a thesaurus in a dictionary after I transcribe some. Like, what word did he just use there? We're talking about this at a granular level instead of a what level? Granular. Oh yeah, a small level. Okay. You're supposed to write on an 8th grade level, right? I'm perfect for the job. Sankey is like the professor up there, man. And I learned so much listening to him speak, but my brain's not moving as fast as his. So I got to go back and listen and read, study my notes, right?
Yeah.
But he's incredible. But he's got this relationship with Kiffin, right? It's almost like the teacher that knows that he can't control the creative kid in the room. So I'm going to try to get along with him. He tried putting him in the back of the class. He tried putting him in front of the class. He tried sending him to the office. Nothing's changing. So let me just try to, maybe if I'm good with Kiffin will be good. And you know what? It's worked. I think Lane's got more respect for the league office in the league now, Neal.
I do too. And look, you know this. The SEC is about brands. It's about brands. It's not about teams. It's about brands. The more brands you have, the more you can market your overall brand. You can't be just Alabama and Nick Saban. He's awesome. He's the GOAT. He's the best. All that, sure. You got to have more. You got to have every week the big national game. We're about to go into this new era where you're going to go up against Fox. Fox is going to make this Saturday night game, Big Ten game. They're going to make this thing a monster. They're going to do everything they can to turn it into what NBC has done with the Sunday night NFL game. They're going to try every bit of that. And the SEC's got to be able to match that, whether it's at nighttime or in the daytime or both. or whatever the case may be, and you need brands to do it. They're going to get the big Hook'em brand. That's a good one. They got Alabama. They got big bad Georgia. They got LSU. LSU sexy. There's a reason CBS puts LSU on all the time. It's because people up north are kind of interested in LSU. They'll watch LSU. LSU's kind of exotic, if you will.
Exotic. Yeah, that's the word.
And Ole Miss went from being, sir, would you like a little bit of salt with your oatmeal, to this really fascinating, what are they going to do next brand. And that's good for the league. And Kiffin's good for the league. And that's why when people do, the league's trying to keep Ole Miss down, I'm like, no, they're not. No, they're not. Nope. They would love for an Ole Miss to be a big brand. Because
think about this.
Having another big brand gives you another big matchup. Ole Miss versus Texas. You can make that a big game because it's Lane Kiffin and all this stuff. You don't want a bunch of boring brands. Boring's boring.
Well, you're there. I mean, think about this. So I'm watching the ESPN Game Day. They're in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, for exotic LSU against legendary Alabama, Nick Saban.
Yeah.
And they cut into your coach. They throw to Oxford, Mississippi. Used to be the softest team on everybody's schedule. A trip to Ole Miss was a good week for everybody in the 90s.
Yeah.
I remember the Alabama staff saying, "Oh man, we're going Ole Miss. Here we go. Boosters going, $100 handshakes after. Hey man, Ole Miss, this is easy peasy." You're cutting away now to talk to the Ole Miss coach, Lane Kiffin. And he's got the Hollywood, look going here, right? That if that's anybody else, Ole Miss, that ain't happening. No. Nobody else is bringing those cameras to Oxford, Mississippi. It ain't happening. It ain't happening. Lane Kiffin keeps Ole Miss, not just because of the personality, not just because of the Twitter. You got to back it up. But this guy's showing you he can back it up. He can coach these You got a quarterback there not playing. He'll probably start at half the other schools in the league. He's bringing some talent in. You brought in this Pete Golding. He's got something to prove. And his guys play with a flair and an attitude. I don't know who the marketing team is there and what they're doing with these Ole Miss colors. They're unbelievable. These uniform combinations, these speckles. This is incredible. This is beautiful. Like, this is one of the best uniforms. Put it right there with, all-time great uniforms. Ole Miss has got it going. Like, the marketing, the branding, Kiffin, So is there a little, there's probably a little baggage here and there with Lane. And there's probably some questions of sustainability. Do you really have the money? I don't know. But maybe one of your graduates, becomes a CEO of Dish Network. You got to find somebody to fund this thing. Somebody's got to write the checks. But at least think about this. If you're at Ole Miss, it's got to be a lot easier to write the checks for Lane Kiffin and his staff than Florida.
No doubt.
That's trying to convince their people, Billy Napier's really the guy.
No doubt.
Keep them. People in Florida are like, wait, I don't know about this. I want the Gators to win, but is this really the guy? Do I really want to get invested in this coach? I think they have the number 3 recruiting class right now. Do I think they're going to finish with that? No. Because these kids are signing up for, do you really want to invest in Billy Napier? I don't think you do. But Lane Kiffin, you know what you're going to get. It's become a proven, and so that's why this game has the potential to be the biggest. Because if Kiffin gets this signature win, well, now it's a lot easier to invest. Now you just beat the number 1 team. You can beat anybody.
Oh, absolutely. They've done a phenomenal job of NIL here. And I give Kiffin, they gave a lot of people credit, but you got to give Kiffin the credit because Kiffin, unlike a lot of coaches who are afraid to sort of challenge the fans, challenge the boosters,
I heard him call him out about the fans there not showing up, right?
Well, and he did it last year when this Auburn thing got started. Because it got started early. I'll tell you a story. It was Monday press conference day. Ole Miss was getting ready to play, I don't know, somebody. And I get a text from one of the media relations people. Hey, did Auburn just fire Harsin? And I went, yeah. Lane comes in 3 minutes later, knowing someone, probably me, is going to ask about Auburn. And I did it in an innocuous way, like, hey, your name's going to start coming up when your name comes up for these jobs that start coming open, how do you handle that? And he's like, well, we don't talk about it, blah, blah, blah. But he knew that question was coming, right? I mean, I didn't tell him it was coming, but he knew it was coming. They were smart enough to know, oh, this is happening, and boom, here it goes. And almost immediately he switches into, hey, look, to do this the way we want to win, we've got to have more. This is, and he started telling people, I need $7 million in NIL a year. And Ole Miss immediately goes over 10 million. They get to like 11, 12 million dollars. And so, yeah, look, a win over Georgia. And look, I don't think this doesn't happen if they lose to Georgia, because everybody loses to Georgia. But yeah, a win over Georgia is a game changer for them. It's a total, it means more to the program than it does to the team, because what I was getting at a little while ago, and we got off on a tangent that the listeners probably really enjoyed. A win over Georgia doesn't guarantee a spot in the CFP for Ole Miss. They still got to have help. They're number 9 right now. If they beat Georgia and then assuming a win over ULM and a win over Mississippi State, they're still not getting to Atlanta unless Alabama loses to both Kentucky and Auburn. I guess it could happen. I'm not betting on it. So you're not getting to Atlanta, so you're not going to be a conference champ, right? There's only 4 spots. But I can easily draw a scenario where the winner of Oregon-Washington, 1 loss, wins the Pac-12, they get in. Florida State runs the table, wins the ACC title, they get in. I don't know who in the ACC is beating them. I'm sure someone can, but they look like the best team. Michigan, Ohio State, one of them's undefeated, wins the Big Ten, champs. Then the SEC championship plays. You got Alabama with 1 loss. You'd have, in this scenario, Georgia with 1 loss. The winner's 12-1 conference champion. They're probably getting in over 11-1 Ole Miss, because the committee has said, hey, championships matter. And that's before we even mention Texas. Let's say Texas runs the table somehow, some way, wins the Big 12. They beat Alabama in Tuscaloosa. That 1 loss, Texas is in. So you could very easily be 11-1 Ole Miss and not make the playoff. So you can't go, hey, this is the biggest game ever.
You could be 11-1 Georgia and not make the playoff.
100%.
Because if you lose to Alabama in the SEC championship game, let's just say it's a 2-loss Bama. Let's say Auburn beats Bama. It's a 2-loss Bama that beats Georgia, and Georgia has 1 loss. And Texas finishes with 1 loss. Texas beat Alabama. Yeah. Texas beat the SEC champion.
Yeah.
In this scenario.
Oh, Washington, there's a scenario, Mike, where no SEC team gets in. There's no question about it. It's right there.
Well, and last night, that's what, there was an Alabama. I thought it was a fan. I'm sure it was a media member, but it sounded like a fan. Do you want to explain why Alabama's still at number 8 after beating LSU? Well, you're right. It was an oversight because only Alabama exists, sir. No, that's not the answer. The answer is because Oregon is kicking everybody's tail.
Yeah.
And Texas beat you head to head. So Alabama is pinned behind 1 loss Texas. I asked earlier in the conference about transitive properties. How long does that Texas win stand up? They've even changed quarterbacks now. But this quarterback that just played looked really good. So if you're Alabama and you're number 8, this is unfamiliar turf to Alabama. Wait a minute. What do you mean we're not the highest ranked 1-loss team? What do you mean there's 2 1-loss teams ranked ahead of Alabama? Well, one of them's Texas. They beat you in your stadium. And we can talk all day about how great Nick Saban is, Neal, but he blew it earlier this year. He did a terrible job getting his quarterback ready. Terrible job. Tommy Rees did an awful job with that. They're winning in spite of him, I still think. So you were 1-loss Bama at number 8. You're behind a 1-loss Texas, and the committee's telling you that 1-loss Oregon is better than you. That's scary, because that means if Oregon wins the Pac-12 and chalk holds, and you're 1-loss Bama. Now, maybe if Georgia beats an undefeated Alabama needs to be rooting for Georgia to beat Ole Miss. They need to play an undefeated Georgia in the SEC championship game to give them that rocket fuel they would need to leap over other 1-loss. And we've seen it happen. I'm not saying it can't.
Yeah.
But and conversely, Tennessee is rooting more for, and what a curious and strange relationship Tennessee and Lane Kiffin. You could do a whole book on that. I mean, the relationship between Lane, it's like a bad marriage, or maybe a good marriage, or maybe both. I don't know, but it's a Hollywood marriage. I mean, they love each other. They hate each other. I was there for it. I had a front row seat. And there's still people, Lane is still the most polarizing figure in Knoxville, Tennessee history, and he always will be. There was a guy that wanted to name like a sewer plan after him after he left. That's a very true story. That actually is a true story. The Lane Kiffin sewage plant. They wanted to name it that. And then there's still people, there's still guys that even though he left him under a 3-year cloud of investigation, Part of that because of the way the NCAA operated, as much
Yeah.
as thing, Lane may or may not have known about recruits and hostesses going to games away from camp. He may or may not have known about that, right? Some people might call that a lack of institutional control. The NCAA called it a violation for Bruce Pearl. But I digress. Lane, they're infatuated with the guy. And then, of course, the game that occurred there a couple years ago, that'll never go away.
Crazy.
That'll always be one of the memories, whether you think it's great or bad or worse, or Lane, one hand in the bottom. I mean, there's been so many moments, but now Tennessee is on their knees praying for Lane Kiffin to beat Georgia, because if the Vols beat Missouri and Lane Kiffin beats Georgia, that means that Tennessee can beat Georgia to go to the SEC championship game. They will be in control of their destiny. Their dreams will be answered. Georgia's coming to their place with the SEC East on the line. If Lane can beat Georgia and Tennessee can beat Eli Drinkowitz. And I don't know if there's 3 syllables in his name or not. Drinkowitz. I kind of like Drinkowitz better right now.
Yeah.
Just poke fun in. But so this game's. I know I've sold you on Ole Miss's ability to get this upset. I know you know how impressed I am with Lane Kiffin and Ole. I love the marriage, the brand. It's fantastic. Steve Spurrier will never be back. This is the closest thing we're going to get. Some people might say it's a little watered down, but it's still fun like Spurrier. He hasn't won like Spurrier, but he's fun like Spurrier. But I'll say this, Kirby Smart is chiseled on that Mount Rushmore now of SEC coaches, Neal. And when I started covering this program, he wasn't there. And I've watched Kirby grow as a coach, and I've seen him this is the best staff I've ever covered. Will Muschamp is a fantastic defensive coach. Mike Bobo is a fantastic offensive coordinator. This staff is so in tune with one another. They adjust so quickly. And Lane's going to know that. Lane's going to know that what works in the first half isn't good. Lane at least has the knowledge to combat that and say, guys, they've got more. They're coming at more. What you just saw in that opening drive, don't buy into that. There's more coming. They're going to adjust. When he goes in at halftime, he's not going to go, well, this is working, let's keep it working. He's going to go, no, they're going to have answers for this. We've got to flip it to 3 and 4. These guys, the 3-dimensional chess that's going to be going on Saturday night is going to be unbelievable. And the coaches, I think, are going to – I give Georgia a slight advantage, but only a slight advantage because Lane has a working knowledge of their system. This is going to come down to the players. This is going to come down to Jackson Dart and Carson Beck and which quarterback handles the moment better. This is going to come down to Quinshon Judkins and Ladd McConkey and which skill position player makes the bigger plays. This is going to come down to your quote-unquote no-name defense, which Georgia started with 3 years ago. They were the no-name defense versus a guy like Javon Bullard back there, who's a future NFL star safety, versus Smile Munden, who's probably the most underappreciated linebacker, maybe the only guy in the field that can take Judkins down one-on-one in the flats. This is going to come down to who executes and who turns it over. It's that even. I throw all the metrics out because I watched Georgia and Missouri last week, and if they didn't have their uniforms on, you wouldn't have known who was Georgia and who was Missouri because it was that equal. It really was. And it came down to who played better and who coached better. And I've been on this rampage trying to get Kirby Smart some credit, not because I cover him, right? Because I've had plenty of opportunities and times when I've gotten sideways with Kirby. But he's done an unbelievable job coaching this team. A lot of what you're seeing is coaching. He has done an unbelievable job coaching. You say, well, they got all these 4 and 5 stars. Yeah, but they got nothing out of the portal. They got nothing like you got out of the portal. And their quarterback, is he good? Yeah, but is he really better than Jackson Dart? At this stage of his career, he certainly doesn't have Jackson's mobility. He's a bit of a statue back there. He's got NFL arm talent, but how many NFL receivers has he got to throw to? So, there's a lot of moving pieces. And, gosh, I can't believe we went this long. But this always happens when we do our shows together, Neal. We keep doing. We're still on the air. We haven't been unplugged or censored yet. So we must do okay.
I appreciate your time so much. You're fantastic. You're really fun. I can already hear the emails and texts and stuff coming my way about get him back on. So I really, really appreciate it. Enjoy the game Saturday night. I look forward to reading your coverage, and you're terrific at what you do. So thanks so much for your time.
For you, Neal, I've enjoyed the friendship, man. You tell it like it is, and I've got a lot of respect for that. And all the Georgia fans, when you came on our Dog Nation podcast earlier this week, man, I'm still getting compliments. And the way you tell the story of Ole Miss is better than anyone. And you can put it in the right perspective because of all your years in the SEC and the other teams you've covered. I know it's not always popular, but I appreciate you always telling the truth and giving an unfiltered take. So thanks for having me on, and this is going to be a great game Saturday night, man.
Thanks, buddy. Talk to you soon.
Be in touch.
Radi Nabulsi covers Georgia. He's actually the publisher of UGAsports.com, part of the Rivals Network. It's one of my favorite sites on the network. You guys have probably, by the time you see this, you've seen some of the crossover that we have. Anthony Dasher and I exchanged questions and answers. Anthony's answers were much more in depth than mine, and I immediately felt guilty. Radi, kind enough to spend some time with us here on the podcast. How are you, sir?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having me, Neal.
So let's dive into Georgia. This is fun. It's an interesting thing because I think these two schools are kind of a lot alike. They both sort of party the same way. Ole Miss people love going to Athens. It's the first time to go there since 2013, 2012. Last time,
long time.
The last time Ole Miss played at Georgia, I went over on a Thursday. It was 2013. It was the Thunder had just traded James Harden. They were opening the regular season against the San Antonio Spurs on a Thursday night without James Harden. And on Friday, I sat down with Beverly Kimdiche at a Barnes & Noble or a Books A Million, one or the other, somewhere in Gwinnett County. And we were doing a big story about her son, Denzel, who at the time was a linebacker for Ole Miss, and her other son, Robert, who at the time was the top-ranked high school prospect in the country. And I anticipated it just being sort of a visit that would lead to a story. And I walked out of there and immediately went back to my hotel and transcribed and wrote, because she basically told me that Robert was going to be going to Ole Miss. That's how long it's been since Ole Miss has played in.
I think that game was freezing too, if I'm not mistaken.
What's that?
I think that game was really cold too, if I recall.
Seems like it was. Yeah, it was November.
Yeah, I think it was a pretty miserable game. Got down on the sideline. I think I froze my tail off. But yeah, the Kimdiches were great. We started covering Robert in going into 8th grade. He was a giant. It's like, wait a minute, you still got a year of middle school to go. we actually ran into him at a gym. We were there to see other kids. We're like, who's that? They're like, oh, let me tell you about this kid. His older brother's already a starter at Grayson or wherever he was starting as a 10th grader. Like, this kid's going to be pretty good. So the great family and a great storyline. Georgia really tried hard to get him, and Georgia tried hard to get a lot of Ole Miss kids, but they haven't had success. A lot of kids want to go play for Lane Kiffin right now.
Well, Georgia's having a lot of success on the field, Radi. I'm sure you've noticed. They haven't lost in a while. 42-1 in the last 43 or 43-1, something like that. 26 in a row. It's an incredible statistic. What has it been like covering this?
It has been fun. I mean, I started covering Georgia in 1993 as a student photographer, working for the Red and Black, the local newspaper, and then I started working for the Athletic Association for years. I was a team photographer for years. So I've kind of seen it, and I've just seen the absolute heartbreak that Georgia fans have gone through, the prayer in Jordan Hare, second 26 against Alabama. I went through the Donnan years and the Coach Richt years where Georgia was always close, but never on top. And again, sometimes it hurts worse to be so close and to have it ripped out away from you at the last second. And I just watched Georgia fans I'm in the media. I can't be partial, but you feel sympathy for the fans that just had it taken away for years and years and years. And there was a 4-number word that was just a derogatory statement to any Georgia fan. If you were ever in an argument with a Georgia fan, you could just go 1980. And they would just lose their minds. It was it was a slur, because it didn't matter that you had beaten Kentucky 7 times in a row. All Kentucky had to say was, hey, 1980. And you're like, what the hell? Or Georgia Tech. Lowly Georgia Tech had lorded over them because they'd won one in 1990, a co-championship with Colorado. And Florida had won some, Clemson had won them, Tennessee had won some. So Auburn with Cam Newton, everybody could point to a championship but Georgia, and it drove them nuts. So when they finally won it, and just from a journalistic standpoint, to see them win it in Indianapolis, with a Keely Ringo pick 6, the catharsis, the outpouring of emotion for a fan base that had been starved of a championship for 40 years, that felt like they should have one every few years. Call it entitlement, I don't know. But again, they were close. And then there was one year where their undefeated, but they don't get into the final two in the BCS. In other words, just always inches close, and there's always the what if factor. So when they finally won it, that was huge. Then last year they weren't expected to win it, and they did it again. And they go 15-0, even though they lost 15 guys to the NFL and 13 guys to the portal. You're like, what the hell's going on in Athens? This 1-2. And then I'm a very pessimistic person when I do my picks, but I was looking at the schedule this year and I'm like, Georgia's going to be favored in all these games. Even though they lost another 10 guys to the NFL and another 14 or so to the portal. I'm like, this is the best part, I guess, for what we do with rivals is the recruiting. Georgia's been on such a roll of recruiting for so long under Kirby Smart. It literally is plug and play because you can lose. And this is the most beat up Kirby Smart team ever in his 8 years. They're still undefeated. They shouldn't be with as many injured starters they've had out. So it's been a very wild ride to know that even when we break the story about a guy being out, and then everyone goes, well, who's going to back him up? And we talk about him, and that guy's like a 4 or 5 star, or a highly coveted 3-star that Kirby's got into a backup role. It's a machine, and I've never covered a machine. I covered the highs and lows, the roller coaster of the Richt years and the Donnan years, but to watch this team just rebuild year after year and be favored year after year, it is surreal. And I tell people all the time, you're living in the golden age of Georgia football. It'll never be like this again. So enjoy it.
Yeah, these are the good old days. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, and they may end Saturday. You never know. So just don't lament only beating this team by 10 points. Don't complain about that because there's 98 other teams in college football right now that would trade places with you to have the record that you have.
So I have a friend, Parker Fleming, Stats of War on Twitter. Parker's a redheaded TCU fan, computer geek, lives out in the West, someplace, Wyoming, I think. He puts out computer models, really broken down in depth, more depth than my measly head can't quite wrap. I can't really wrap my cerebrum around a lot of his numbers, but I look at the bottom lines and look at some of the things that he says. And Parker says that Georgia's got about a 60% chance of winning on Saturday. He's got Georgia winning by like 3.7 points or something along those lines. And he goes into the reasons why his computers, it's not Parker, it's his computers,
right?
Like Ole Miss's chances to have a shot. And he basically says, you use the word machine, and that's what triggered the question. He says, look, Georgia's really good, but they're not the flying death machine that they were the last couple of years, that they're a little more susceptible. I'm curious, you've seen this Georgia team 9 times so far this season, and you saw the last couple of years. How is this team different from the one that rolled through college football the last couple?
They're not as good. I mean, hands down. They're still one of the best teams in college football. I don't think anybody's, maybe Michigan. But then again, it's easier to be good when you know what the plays are. But I'd be facetious there. No, Michigan's really good.
You're right, though. I mean, who knows?
But my point is Carson Beck better than Stetson Bennett? He's had every game he's thrown for 250 yards in his first year. I don't know that anybody in the SEC's ever done that. So it's pretty impressive that he's been out there. And, of course, they got a freshman kicker who's been pretty good. You lose Podlesny. But my point is you don't have the defensive front that they had. When you have Jalen Carter, who I thought was the best player in college football last year. I mean, you see what he's doing. He should have been the number 1 pick. And I'm not saying that because I covered Georgia. It's just because I was at the NFL Combine and I spoke to people, and they all wanted him. He's absolutely killing it for the Eagles. He's a monster. And prior to that, you had, 3 guys on the defensive front who all went in the first round. You don't have any first round defensive talent in the trenches right now. Maybe Michael Williams in a year or two, but you just don't have a guy who could go to the SEC championship game last year. Georgia needed a play. Jalen Carter goes through, grabs up Jaden, quarterback for LSU, Jaden, and just holds him up like a child.
Yeah.
Just doesn't sack him, just picks him up off the ground, and they blow the whistle, and he sits there and holds him for a second. Like you just picked up Jaden Daniels like he's an 8-year-old. What? Who does that? They don't have that guy. They have a better secondary than they did, but you had 2 Butkus Award-winning middle linebackers, and Jacoby Dean and Roquan Smith. You don't have a You have a guy in Spalmunda who's really good, and Dumas Johnson, who's actually out for this game. They're really good, but are they going to win the Buckets Award? Probably not. Will they be drafted high? Yeah, but I don't know that they'll go in the first round. My point is really, really good, but not generational. And that's what we saw the last 2 years, especially that 2 years ago, that team, all those guys were drafted, just about every one of them. Even some guys who weren't starters got drafted highly, like Quay Walker. So my point is, this team offensively, defensively, it's not as good. They're not as good, but they're still beating everybody because they're still really good. So it's so they're susceptible. They trailed 14-3 against South Carolina. South Carolina's not a great football team. They trailed at Auburn. Florida drove the field in the first drive and made it look like they'd forgotten to get on the bus. So teams can get up to them, and they had to fight against Missouri. They had it on them, and they haven't played a team as good as Ole Miss yet. So this team is not as good as they were the last 2 years, but they're still better than 95% of the teams they face.
They're also really resilient. I think that's the credit to them, is that it would be so easy to get bored, to get complacent, and then when you face some adversity,
start chasing little stats for your own instead of being be a little selfish.
Yeah, because it'd be super simple to go at the end of the day, hey, we won 2 titles, man. I mean, we did it. I mean, what are you going to do? You going to criticize us because we lost to Missouri? I mean, shut up. And instead they've been really resilient, and it almost looks to me from the outside looking in that when they get cornered a little bit is when they really get dangerous, and they kind of dial in and play their best football when it matters the most.
Yeah, I think it was maybe Cole Kublik or somebody said that this team can get – this is a bored Georgia football team. And when they play a UAB, or they play a team that's Vandy, they just don't try that hard. And those teams take advantage of it, because those teams, it would make their season, anybody's season. If Ole Miss wins this game, it's their best win since when?
It's a modern era best win. It's their best win. To answer your question, I mean, the only ones that would immediately come to mind as in that same category would be, I'll give you some examples. It would be in this era, and I think it's even a bigger win because of where Georgia is today. It would be winning at Alabama in 2015.
Right.
It was a big win. Beating Alabama in Oxford, the Katy Perry game, 2014, where the goalpost made it all the way to Funkies, and so did Katy Perry. Yeah. It'd be 2008, beating Tim Tebow in Florida in the swamp.
Right.
But here's the difference. That win, let's take it for example. Yeah, they went to Florida and beat Tebow. It was the week after they lost at home to Vanderbilt, and the week before they lost at home to South Carolina. So, yeah, it was a big win. It was like college football. It was really cool. But it didn't mean a whole hell of a lot, really, in the whole scheme of things. The win over Alabama in 2014 was an arrival moment. It felt like the beginning of something. Turns out it wasn't, but it felt like it was. 2015 set them up to have a really special season, but they didn't get it done. Look, if they beat Georgia on Saturday, and for the record, I don't think they're going to quite get there. We'll talk about that in a minute.
They're 11-1 at that point.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, you beat ULM, you beat Mississippi State, you're 11-1, and they're spending the next 3 weeks talking about whether they're going to make it into the playoff or not. And statistically, they wouldn't have a great chance, but they'd have a chance. They'd have enough of a chance to justify the conversation, and they would cheer for some chaos the rest of the way. It would be a monumentally big win, and it would put them on the map, and it would make them a giant part of the national conversation at a minimum. And that's going to help them in the portal, and that's going to help them in recruiting. No, it'd be a program-defining win, no doubt.
Absolutely. It'd be one of the biggest wins, Lane Kiffin's career. And you can say, look, come here. We were able to knock off the 2-time defending champ that had won 26 games in a row. So that's what we can do. And we did it on the road. We did it at their house. That would be phenomenal. Now, here's the thing. When you get Georgia's attention like that, like Florida did, they go out and they turn into world beaters. They're no longer bored, is my point, and they come out and they play pretty tough. Now, people say, well, how do you avoid that complacency? How do you, like you said, just hey, we lost to Missouri. What are you complaining about? We won you 2 titles. Well, the guys that are doing it, all the guys that won that first title, and people say, well, this Georgia team will be complacent in year 2, in 2022. And I remember asking those guys, I'm like, well, what gets you fired up? They said, well, I mean, after winning a title, why not just kind of cruise a little bit? And they said, I didn't win a title. I hardly played in that championship game. All the guys that played got drafted. This is my chance to make a name for myself. And I want to win it. I backed up, Broderick Jones. I backed up, Stetson Bennett. I backed up George Pickens. So I want my time to shine. And that's what you're seeing in this attempt for a third championship is Carson Beck's like, look, I waited at Georgia for 4 years before I could get out there, or 3 years. I want my shot. I want to do what Stetson Bennett did. You get a left tackle who's a not a true freshman. He didn't play at all last year because he had a back surgery. So this is his freshman year. He's like, it doesn't matter that I'm taking over for Broderick Jones. I got a ring last year. I didn't even play in one game. So this is my first time. So he comes out and plays because he's trying to make it to the NFL and he wants to play for Georgia and he wants to win a title this year. And he wants to be in that championship parade in that first, second, third car as the starting left tackle, even though he's a redshirt freshman, because he didn't do it. So what you're seeing is the guys who did not get the shine last year, who weren't in the spotlight, they're just as fired up to try to beat everybody as the guys who did win it last year. So it's a new crop when you have such amazing turnover with so many guys going to the NFL and a lot of guys going to the portal. I mean, you look around the SEC, you see Jermaine Burton's at Alabama. You see A.D. Mitchell playing for Texas. Major Burns at LSU. I mean, there's a ton of guys up there. Tresman Marshall at Alabama. There's a lot of Georgia guys playing elsewhere in the league. So it's a huge amount of turnover. And those new guys are just as fired up to win games like this. Now, again, they're not as good, but they're still better than most.
I asked Lane Kiffin. It was interesting because he has a pretty interesting perspective on these dynasties because he's been a part of two of them. He was at Southern Cal on Pete Carroll's staff when Reggie Bush and Matt Leinart and all those guys won 30 some odd games in a row. And had they just been able to tackle Vince Young 3 titles in a row, and then it was funny when I asked him that he immediately brought up Vince Young. I mean, coaches are so funny. They remember the losses.
By far. Yeah.
And then he was with Nick Saban. He and Kirby Smart both were on Nick Saban's staff in the mid 2010s, when they just dominated and they won 26 in a row and a couple of championships and all of that. And, and I asked him, you've been there. How do you avoid the complacency? How do you avoid the boredom? And he said, it's simple. It's a simple answer. He said, it's elite coaching is what's required. And he said, you had that with Pete Carroll and you obviously have that with Coach Saban. And he goes, and now you have it with Kirby. I mean, and people expect Lane to do a lot of trash talking. He doesn't. He's not a big trash talker, and he did it with Jimbo. But that's about it. He has immense respect, and I think he's right. And you're there. I mean, this is about Kirby and his staff as much as it's about anything. It's that relentless recruiting and their ability to maintain. And Lane was talking about how you have to do it daily. It's not something that happens.
There's no pregame speech that leads up to this and make them go out and play like their hair's on fire. It doesn't happen that way.
It's every day you have to fight the complacency. And he said, obviously, they've been able to do it for an extended period of time, and it's a compliment to them.
Yeah, I tell people this all the time because on Twitter, I'll be like, I can't believe Kirby did this, and it looks amazing. And they'll say, well, you're a homer. I'm like, no, objectively, what he's doing is nuts. And I use this story a lot. Kind of broke the news, I think it was last year sometime, during fall camp, week 2, we find out the team's going to the movies on a Friday night. I'm like, oh, that's a nice treat. They've had 2 weeks of camp. I guess they don't have the traditional 2-a-days like they used to, but they have the tougher part of camp. When they break for camp, the students arrive, and then it's basically just fall practice. So they get to go to the movies. That wasn't a treat. That wasn't a reward for hard practices. They were practicing going to the movies, Neal. Like, here's how we go. When we go to an away game, okay, we're going to check into our hotel at 7 o'clock. We're going to meet downstairs in the lobby. These guys get on bus A. All these guys get on bus B. All these guys get on bus C. We go in the theater. You get your snacks or whatever. You don't get loud. Everyone, you put your phones away. You watch the movie. When we're done, you don't go into the next theater over and watch the end of another movie. We all get back on the bus. We all go back to the hotel. They practiced going to the movies. That is the Kirby Smart way. He leaves nothing to chance. And again, he's detail oriented, and sometimes you get bogged down in the weeds, and he is beatable. And if anybody can do it, I think that the way Lane Kiffin coaches, when he's just maximizes mismatches, and he knows what Nick Saban is going to do. He knows what Kirby Smart's going to do in those situations because he coached beside him. So it's a 3rd and 7, on their side of the field. He's like against a quarterback that's a dual threat. He's like, this is what Kirby likes to do. So this is how we're going to trick him. This is how we're going to combat that. Kirby's rather conservative. He knows he's got better players. He knows he just needs to play mistake free. And if he does that, the numbers point to him winning, and it's proven out. He learned it from Saban. It doesn't need to be a lot of trickery or scheme change. It's like our schemes work, so we're going to do it. So that coaching wise, they respect each other on the field, but then how they recruit and how they motivate their teams and how they interact with their teams, they recruit each other and they respect each other as well. Kirby was just he was defending Lane Kiffin yesterday. He's like, hey, all you people think he does crazy stuff, that's no. He is a fundamental coach. He likes to beat you with fundamentals. He understands it. He's just also good at, calling up plays to beat you. So immense respect from both of them. And, we were kind of hoping for some fireworks. We in the media were like, hey, come on. Let's get some of those little jabs back and forth. We always love that stuff for the, all of a sudden all that ad revenue comes in because you wrote a story about one of them. But you're not going to get that with them. And no. You can tell who Kirby likes and who he doesn't. There's no question. I don't think he's a big Shane Beamer fan.
Not a big Dan Mullen fan either, best I can
tell.
No,
he is not. And again, there'll be a little slip there. Something in his the way he talks about when he was talking about Eli Drinkwitz, nothing but absolute respect. And he knew that was going to be a tough game. And now when he's talking about Lane Kiffin, it is nothing but respect because he knows Lane Kiffin's dangerous and he knows that he's really good. Great offensive mind versus great defensive mind. Who the hell knows how this is going to play out?
So, Georgia's big rivals typically they have monumental rivalry with Alabama now, and that game appears to be looming in the near future and could be incredibly meaningful this time around. Tennessee, I guess Georgia Tech to a degree because it's there, but Georgia Tech hasn't been a threat in a while. These kids that are playing for Georgia now, when they were in high school, a lot of them, Ole Miss wasn't very good. Missouri wasn't very good. How much of a challenge has it been for Kirby and his staff, in your opinion, to get guys to understand that, hey, Missouri's good, Ole Miss is really good, Ole Miss can beat you if you don't play well?
I don't think it's been a challenge at all. I'm not saying that just to be flippant. It's just the way they approach it. Like you said, that coaching every day. He doesn't try to get up for a game. He tries to get his guys up, but he doesn't do the rah-rah thing for each game because you can't do it 12 times. You can't do it 15 times.
Right.
You can't come up with enough speeches. You can't come up with enough warnings. He has replaced that with a more methodical approach. Saying, look, it's easy to look ahead, and maybe if we're facing a team that does something different, we'll put in a period on how to stop a team that goes tempo, or we need to work on the team we're facing this weekend doesn't have a running quarterback, but we need to get the scout team to give us some running quarterback looks. So let's go over and work on that. He's basically tried to make each of these teams more faceless, if you will, more X's and O's. Let's not talk about the rivalry. Let's not talk about the history. History doesn't matter. Georgia leads a series with Ole Miss. That doesn't give Georgia a first down. That doesn't give Georgia, the ball starting on the 35. It gets you nothing. Anything that happened yesterday doesn't matter. So he doesn't bring up the history and stuff like that. He doesn't try to bring in, speakers who the last guy to face Ole Miss. He's not going to bring up the fact that in his first year he went to Ole Miss and got his head kicked in. 31-0 at the half. And I remember being down on the sideline with one of my writers. And I looked over and I'm like, man, their tight ends are gigantic. They're going to kill Georgia. And he looks at me and goes, those aren't tight ends, idiot. Those are wide receivers. I'm like, holy crap. Georgia was small. They were really small. Kirby mentioned his first press conference. He's like, yeah, we got to get bigger on both sides of the ball. He had met his starting right guard, and he thought he was a fullback. This was a small Georgia team, and they lost a lot that first year. But then he got bigger and he got stronger, and now they look like an Alabama team. Now they look like Clemson did a couple years ago. They're bigger than everybody. We knew that TCU game was going to be a blowout because when we did media days, I saw the starting defensive line. They look like a high school team. Then I stood next to Georgia's starting offensive line. They're all 6'7" or bigger. It's like it felt like giants. And yeah, of course they're going to mash them around. But my point is, Kirby's like, look, we're not going to get into I'm not going to bring up the fact that we lost to them last time I faced them. I need them focused on what happens when Judkin gets it on a toss into the boundary. I need to talk about stopping Trey Harris. I need to talk about the fact that they've got a running quarterback, which has been Georgia's kryptonite, always has been. Most teams are susceptible to a running quarterback as well. But my point is we've seen teams that don't normally have a running quarterback teach their guy to run a few quarterback draws before they face Georgia, and it's been very effective. Auburn did it. And then the fact that Auburn pulled their quarterback who was running and then didn't play him the rest of the way, I'm like, thanks. That's very beneficial. He just ran for a touchdown and you pulled him. Good job.
Hugh Freeze, baby. That's Hugh.
Yeah.
He's got to be the smartest guy in the room. He's got to show you. He's got to show you that he's got all.
You got him on the ropes. Yeah.
Got to show you. It's got to be about Hugh.
Right, and that's why when you mention Alabama, I've been telling people since the first week, they're like, well, how do you think this season's going to play out? I'm like, Georgia's going to have a hard time facing Milroe in the SEC championship game because he's going to run all over everybody. And they're like, then he got benched and everybody started coming after me going, see, you were an idiot. I'm like, hey, I get stuff wrong all the time. Now you saw what he did this past weekend, 4 touchdowns. Good Lord. So, But again, Kirby's not going to, he doesn't do the whole this team, that team. Let's fight Tennessee. I hate those SOBs. It's all about let you focus on your job. Let me deal with the press. Don't read all this outside stuff. And of course, everybody wants to do that. But again, he's effective at it. So that's why it works.
So you mentioned some of the things. So you kind of maybe completely answered the question, but you said earlier that you think this is a real challenge for Georgia. You think this might be the best team Georgia plays all season. What is it about this Ole Miss team that makes you feel that?
Running quarterback. That's Georgia's kryptonite. It's tough to stop them. So basically, let's say they want to try to double up Trey Harris. You got to do something to account for that guy. He can line up all over the place. He can gash you. Well, they run the ball really well. You got maybe the best running back in the SEC. They haven't been great. They're not nearly as stout against the run as they used to be. Just don't have the guys. And your best tackling inside linebacker's out. He broke his forearm last week. So that doesn't bode well. So let's say you have a safety kind of coming up to stop the run. Well, you throw to Trey Harris. You have a safety try to shade over towards Trey Harris. Well, you can run on him. And then if you get both of those stopped, here goes Jackson Dart taking off. Georgia last week ran a lot of trying to stop Missouri and Luther Burden and all their great, Theo Weiss. They go cover 2, trail techniques. The cornerback has his back to the line of scrimmage. And if all of a sudden the quarterback takes off, I told people, watch out for Cook. And some people were saying, oh, no, he's not a runner. He only averages 17 yards a game. By the end of the first half, he was the leading rusher on both sides because he just take off and run. So, in other words, stopping this offense, Georgia has not seen an offense like this that is multiple. Kirby likes to take away, just as Saban does, I'm going to take away the run game. I'm going to take away the passing game, make you one-dimensional, and make you be successful at that. Well, you can't make Ole Miss one-dimensional. Or if you do make them one-dimensional, that other dimension will just gash the crap out of you. So this is the best offense they've seen. Now, what works in Georgia's favor, you've got the 21st best offense in the nation, but on the road, that drops to like 60-something. So it's not as good. It's tough to play on the road in the SEC. We all know that.
Yep.
So Georgia does have that advantage, but I don't know that that's not a 7-point advantage. That's not a 14-point advantage. That's a couple of points. But, maybe that's a false start penalty. Maybe it's when Georgia likes to shift or something like that, you get 1 or 2 of those, and maybe that helps you get some behind the sticks. But you're facing the most explosive offense in the SEC, so it's one of the best in the nation, and that's something they haven't done. Now, defensively, Ole Miss better be ready to stop a ton of weapons. But that's why people say, well, what do you think's going to happen? I'm like, well, if Georgia doesn't turn the ball over, on paper they should win. And to your analyst, he gave Georgia a 60% chance of winning?
Like 60 point something, almost 61%. Yeah.
60. I have a little method that I do against 2 evenly ranked teams.
59-60, something like that, or whatever. Yeah.
To me, I have 2 evenly ranked teams. They get the same number of drives. to me, it's a 50-50 chance of winning. One block here, one tackle there. Have a turnover, to me now it's 60-40 because you take away one drive from one team and you add a drive to the other team. Couple turnovers, that's what determined the Missouri game. Georgia-Missouri going back and forth. All of a sudden, Brady Cook throws 2 interceptions. That kills everything in their second half. And Georgia comes away with a 9-point win. So if they don't turn the ball over twice, maybe that game's a lot tighter. Ole Miss comes in, they don't turn it over, but Georgia does, then they're walking out winners. But if Ole Miss turns it over, or if Georgia doesn't turn it over, then I like Georgia's chances. I know it sounds cliche to say it's a turnover battle, but if you want to know what's going to happen, I guarantee you the results favor the team with the turnovers. It's a fundamental law of football.
I do a 3 times a week show with Tyler Siskey. You're familiar with it. You were kind enough to put it on your board a couple of times. I certainly appreciate it. We have Jeff Collins on most every Monday, the former Georgia Tech coach, former Temple coach, former Florida, Mississippi State defensive coordinator. Jeff says that, look, Brock Bowers, when he's on the field, is the best player on the field. He said, but in some ways, Brock Bowers not being on the field has forced Georgia to use more weapons, and that has made Georgia a better offense. He goes, I realize that sounds different. Nobody wants to lose their best player, but in some ways, it's forced Georgia to become more diverse offensively, which has made it more dangerous. Do you buy that?
I do, absolutely. Georgia's got 2 fantastic transfer wide receivers. They brought in Dominic Lovett from Missouri, who was Missouri's leading wide receiver last year, and they brought in Rod Thomas from Mississippi State, who was really good last year for Mississippi State, maybe their top wide receiver. They're not having as many balls and touchdowns as they did last year. So they come to Georgia and they're like, okay, well, we're replacing some good wide receivers. We're 2 of the best in the West, in the East. We're going to Georgia to a guy that likes to throw the ball, and Mike Bobo. We're going to put up some crazy numbers. But then all of a sudden, your leading receiver each week is this tight end, Brock Bowers. He's really good at what he does, and there's times where Georgia could have lost the Auburn game if they didn't have him. But now without him, all of a sudden they're going to Dominic Lovett has a huge game. Ladd McConkey, who's a preseason All-SEC wide receiver, he's had a couple of his best games in the last 2 weeks. So I don't want to say Brock Bowers is a crutch, but it's easy to lean on when you got him out there just doing stuff that nobody else can do. So now all of a sudden you have to spread the ball out more. You have to run the ball a little bit more because you can't just go, hey, worst case scenario. And we do a watch along show. I do it with Jim Donnan, the former Georgia Bulldogs head coach, and we basically have a camera on us filming his reactions as we watch the game. You can watch it the same time you watch the Georgia Ole Miss game. Just put it on YouTube. We're there. You can have us on a phone or a laptop or an iPad, and then watch the game on your television. Maybe pause your game about 10 seconds. And it's a running joke. We're like, okay, 3rd and 8, throw it to 19. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize that if you're having a hard time, throw it to Brock Bowers. Now without him, everyone has to execute more. It's really easy to go out there and go, well, just throw it to Brock. Now it's like, what are we going to do to move the ball? Jeff's right. And I tease Jeff. I say screw him because we actually went to the same high school. We went to Rockdale County High School together. He was a couple years ahead of me. And then he went to cover Coach Georgia Tech. And I never really did get a chance to kind of give him grief about that. But Jeff's a really good dude. We ran track together. So.
How about that? Yeah, he's a great guy. A lot of fun.
He is a great guy. A lot of people like to give him crap because he coached at Tech, but he's a good dude. Knows football. He really knows his stuff, and he's right. So when he says it makes them to be a better offense, no one wants to think that happens, but it does make them all of a sudden. Ra-Ra's getting more passes, and Dominic Lovett's getting more passes, and Dejon Edwards is running different routes, and I mean you see them do different stuff because he can't just go 12 personnel and give it to the best tight end in college football.
All right, I'm wrapping up here. I always hate when people ask me fan questions because I'm like, I don't know, man. I'm not a fan. I don't necessarily walk around town talking to fans all day, but I get why the questions are asked. So,
oh, man, I get it, man. It's okay.
I'm going to ask you a fan question. Are the fans to the point now where they're complacent with this? Do they appreciate it?
The fans aren't complacent because, again, they had that 40 years. I mean, you have generations, 2 generations of not having a championship, but being close, almost always being close. Like the best team to never win is kind of the way it felt.
Yeah.
You can do that for 5 years, do that for 10, 15, 20, 25. You go to college in the 90s, and all of a sudden you've got a kid that's 17 years old and it's 2020, and you've not won anything. And your kid's like, why are we fans of this team? That doesn't make any sense. Dad, you were 5 years old when they won their last title. Why do we keep putting up with this? So they're not. Now it's a little bit of, they do appreciate the run they're on. The expectations are through the roof. So even close games, people are like, is this the end? I'm like, well, slow down. What we have noticed, though, is Kirby Smart actually taught the fans what to do. And that sounds stupid, but if you go back to a few years ago when Sam Pittman's in his first year at Arkansas, they go, I think they won their first few games, or they're ranked number 5 in the country. College game day comes to Athens. They do the show from right beside the stadium. They actually fly a drone or a zip line or whatever from the set into the stadium for a 12 o'clock kickoff. The place is sideways. And because Kirby's been telling them all week, I need you to come out. I need you to be loud. Gates open 2 hours before the kickoff. At noon, we need it to be like a nighttime game. Maybe the loudest I've ever heard that stadium. A couple years ago, or last year, when Tennessee comes to town, they jump off sides. That hurried, fast-paced offense they have, that tempo they run, they're jumping off sides. Illegal procedure. And it ruined Tennessee's game plan. So he's got the fans as a weapon. Sanford Stadium's always been loud, but we would have knockdown, drag-out fights at UGAsports.com between our older fans who were like, why is everyone standing up in front of me? And the younger fans are like, stand up instead of sitting back, having wine and cheese. Be loud, be a part of it. Nobody argues that anymore. They all get there. They're very loud. It is now a nightmare place to play. And I cannot say that about, I've been to every stadium in the SEC and most of the big stadiums. I've been doing it 30 something years, been everywhere. I would always tell fans, yeah, Georgia's a great place to play a game, but it's not Death Valley.
Yeah.
It's not Neyland Stadium. I'm sorry. Oh, well, we're loud. You are loud, but you're not as loud as, playing in front of Auburn. That's a zoo there. You've been to Tuscaloosa. It's nuts. Kirby's got them that way now. Now, last week against Missouri, they weren't. It was crazy. And it was a tight game. But he's already done it. And he didn't ask the fans to come out last week. He's asking them this week. He's talking about it being a night game. He said, we need the crowd in this. So Jackson Dart, when his cadence, there's going to be a lot of nonverbal communication. And they're going to try to shift, and they're going to try to hide stuff, and they're going to try to get, especially in the eastern side of the end zone in front of all the students, it's going to be a zoo down there. You're not going to be able to hear. But again, it's not. I've been doing it 30 years. It's not always been that way, even when it mattered. So the fans are now involved. But to your point, or like we were talking about earlier, they didn't get up for a Missouri. They didn't get up for UAB. They didn't get up for some of the other teams they faced. They didn't get up for Ball State. They were excited because, hey, 2-time national champs. Now they feel like they can affect the game. And everybody knew they could to some point, but Kirby's got them believing just like he has his team believing. So it's going to be an absolute wild place on Saturday.
All right, last thing, how do you sort of see it playing out?
Again, I hate to hedge, sound like I'm hemming and hawing, but I really think it's going to come down to the turnovers. If it's no turnovers on either side, I can see Georgia winning by a field goal. 4 points maybe. It could be a shootout. I don't think either of these defenses can stop the other one very much. So I could see 41-37, something like that. I just see a lot of points scored. But again, it's going to come down to turnovers. I'll call my shot now. And again, it's easy to say, but I just really think that in other words, the two offensive coordinators going head-to-head in this are too good to give either one an extra possession or 2 extra possessions.
It's a good point. I mean, Ole Miss LSU played a shootout. It was 55-49. I mean, insanity. But you look back on the game and you're like, where did it kind of turn? And it turned on an LSU turnover early that let Ole Miss get up 2 scores and change the direction of the game. Ultimately, to LSU's credit, they came back and built a 9-point lead in the fourth quarter, and then Ole Miss got a score and a stop and a score, and LSU came really close to winning it on the last couple of plays. But yeah, it was the one turnover was the difference.
I expect that. That's really it. And again, it's people say, well, that's a cop out. I'm like, no, I'm just telling you, I can't predict what the turnover is going to be. So I can't. It's like when you and I have covered recruiting. People ask us all the time, where's this kid going? I'm like, well, the kid hasn't made up his mind yet. if you tell me the kid's had a decision, I can give you, and even if he hasn't told me, I can give you a much better idea of where I think he's going to go. But if I know the kid's up in the air, then I'm supposed to predict where a kid is going to eventually decide to go. Come on.
It's impossible. You
Yeah.
don't know all the details yet. So
I know where he's likely to go, and I know where his mom's pushing him to go. With like Miss Kimdichi. I told people early on. I'm like, Georgia's out of the Robert Kimdichi sweepstakes. Yeah, it's not going to happen. She loves Coach Rick, but kid's going to Ole Miss. Yeah. Oh, and I probably put on the board. Here's what Neal McCready's reporting.
He was going where Denzel was. Period.
Yeah, exactly. Again, family mattered to those guys.
Yeah.
I will tell you a real quick story, a little brag thing. Remember, he had some issues right before the NFL Combine, and everybody's up there for his big interview, and that they have all these stages set up, and all these guys are being interviewed at the same time, but everybody knew where Robert was going to be, and everybody leaves those other ones that comes there, and he answers all these questions about the hotel thing and jumping out a window or whatever it was, and it's just brutal. And he gets all this. I mean, it's just 14 minutes of just absolute hardball questions. Press just eating him alive. He gets off the stage, he's walking out, and everyone's trying to get an exclusive with him, and he walks past me. I'm like, "Hey, been a long time since Grayson," and his just demeanor just changed. He's like, "Rod," he gives me this big bear hug in the middle of the place, and we start talking old times, and all these national reporters are trying to like, well, what have you talked to the New York Jets? What about the Seahawks? And all we're talking about is high school football from like 4 years ago. It was an absolute riot. But again, point being, he remembered me, even though I didn't cover him in college. He remembered me from our rivals days back, talking to him as a 7th, 8th, 9th grade or whatever. And it was that connection. He's like, "Oh, I remember you. You're with me early on. You knew me. I like you. I'm going to give you." He's like, "You call me anytime." I didn't have anything to ask him. I just want to say hi. So you knew he's going to go with his brother. It makes sense. He's like, "Hey, family, people who were with me from the beginning, not when I got big and famous, or who want to just rake me over the coal." So you bring it up, Robert, made me happy. I'd forgotten about that.
It's a weird thing to say about a guy like that, but he was a sweet kid. It just that he loved football. I don't think he loved football the way people wanted him to love football. There were other things in his life, and he wasn't a machine. And then his brother had some issues, and it didn't work out the way that everybody thought it would. But there were some days when that guy was the best player on a field, and
one of the best in the nation, dude.
Yeah, for sure.
Hey, and then everybody's like, "Well, Denzel is Robert's brother." I'm like, "Denzel's an all SEC guy. What the hell are y'all talking about?"
Yeah, he was good, and then Denzel got hurt, and they didn't get to play together. And Denzel, I think emotionally it just kind of wrecked him a little bit, and then the rest. Everything's fragile sometimes. But hey, as always, so much appreciation for what you do and giving us some time, and I look forward to talking to you soon.
I can't wait.
Ben Mintz from Barstool Sports, kind enough to join us as he does each and every week here on the extra edition of the Oxford Exxon podcast as we get you ready for Ole Miss at Georgia Saturday night. Ben, before we get into the Rebels and the Bulldogs and all that's going on, I got to ask you, because you're in Chicago, you got the Barstool Invitational Wednesday. We take this on Wednesday, late morning. Barstool Invitational going on. The Cubs, my Cubs, probably not your Cubs yet. Maybe you'll become a Cubs fan when you stay up there. The Cubs fire David Ross. They hire Craig Counsell. There's a lot of Shohei Ohtani talk all of a sudden. Am I okay to get my hopes up here? Is it okay to get optimistic and to put my Cubs hat on and go, we're going to do this? What's going on?
Well, I can't speak for the Cubs stuff as well, because as far as my baseball loyalty goes, I'm waiting on Tim Elko to get up to the White Sox. After the year he had in low A, high, he ended up in double A. He ended up 28 homers, 106 RBIs. I think there's a chance he makes the White Sox next year. And so I think just off my relationship with him and his dad, I think I just have to go with that for my loyalty.
Okay. That's okay. You can cheer for the White Sox too. That's fine. That's no good. No problem. I'm just asking. You're in the city. There's the Counsell thing was big news there. It was a big splash. Is there an Ohtani buzz that's flying around yet?
Yeah, I've heard a little bit about it at the Barstool office, but I guess maybe I'm kind of just in my own little bubble like I always am. So I don't know. I think it would be I would certainly hope it happens. That would be a lot of fun to go to. I'm looking forward to just going to Wrigley and enjoying everything. And but I can't. I wish I could tell you. I mean, I've heard Big Cats people talking about the Barstool office, whatever that's worth.
Yeah, we got to make it happen, man. It's just, I've done my part. There's a thing on Twitter. What you have to make a pledge of what you'll do if. I said that I will get a pinstripe, the gray road, the blue alternate. I pledge to buy a holiday alternate like 4th of July or Veterans Day or whatever. I'll do all that. I will wear them every single day of the whole season on the Oxford.
Oh, wow.
If they'll sign Shohei Ohtani. That's it. Just sign Shohei Ohtani. I don't care what else you do. The rest of it will play. If you'll do that, I'll pledge to do my part right there.
I love it. Sounds like you'll be flying a lot more W flags if they get him.
Man, that'd be awesome. All right. How's the city treating you?
Okay. Bunch of stuff. We'll keep it condensed here, but had a crazy, I'll just share the story, whatever. I mean, this is how I connect with Ole Miss fans. I always just come on here and tell y'all what's really going on. So I had like a crazy thing when I'm on my way to Chicago, not this last Friday, but the Friday before. Like, I had a place lined up for like 6 weeks in West Loop that I was excited about. And I get a phone call when I'm at like 2 hours outside of Chicago, like, you don't have this place, like right as I'm getting there. And so, yeah. So, I mean, I'm kind of used to doing the scrambling and the wind thing. Like, I mean, I definitely do it better than most, but that threw my whole plans for like a loop. So last week I had to like go look at 4 or 5 places on Monday and, had to go through the approval process and all that stuff. But so I ended up in, I did the interview for Michigan last week. I ended up in Michigan for a few days because I didn't have a place in Chicago for that Halloween. But long story short, Neal, every time something bad happens to me in life, and I've had a lot of things happen to me, it ends up being a blessing somehow. It's the craziest thing. I think it's like a positive energy thing. I don't know. But like all year, I've had a bunch of stuff happen, and it somehow ends up working out great. So I end up getting a way better place. Instead of getting a studio, I got a 32nd floor downtown skyline view that I posted on my Instagram and Twitter.
Yeah.
It's a full 1-bedroom. I'm in West Loop, like right on the edge of downtown. I'm like 7 minutes from our office. Dude, it's spectacular. I'm like freaking out looking out my window because, I was kind of living in a sketchy area at Shreveport like 4 years ago, and so it's awesome. Love my new spot. And then even better than that, I don't know what people have seen out of the new Barstool office. Big Cat did a video about it, but we got a new $20 million office we just opened that's basically like a fun factory with a full basketball court and a golf simulator, and every show has their own studios and state of the art. And honestly, I thought we'd have like 100 people here. We only have like 50 or 60 people here in this just like ridiculous office. And so it's, it's just a spectacular time. And it just feels like Big Cat talked about this last night, but he was like, look, this has been my dream for 10 years to get this fun factory office and get back to Chicago. And, I'm going to be honest, I'm honored to be part of it with the career he's had and his reputation. I mean, when I got rehired, he basically he didn't beg me to come up here, but he kind of close to did. He was like, we need you in this office, you et cetera. And it's awesome. It's a lot of, it's not, it's a lot of, I don't know how to say it. Basically Big Cat had to hand select you if you made it to the Chicago office. So I'm honored to be part of it. And it just feels like the thing I've been talking about lately in life, the second act thing. It's like a whole restart, new thing. And I mean, it's just every bit of it's positive. And I'm just very grateful and excited about what's about to happen the next 2 to 3 years, I would say.
Before we dive into football, what's the latest with the Brick Watch?
Okay, we're in the 30s. I got my Brick Watch on right now. I knew when we did this, I probably screwed up saying 50 with Dave because I think he'd have done 40. But look, the thing is, though, I knew we'd get to 20 or 25, like no problem. But then the real slog is getting from 25 to 40. But once we get to 40, it's going to be over. And right now, I believe we're in the low 30s. I sold one yesterday. So anybody, DM me on Twitter or Instagram. That's still Mintzy. Once again, if you're interested, go to brickwatchcompany.com. You don't have to use a promo code. When you add your watch to checkout, it goes to $1,919 and $1,000 goes to the Grove Collective. No promo code. Dave's tracking it. He knows. But I think we're going to get there. It might take some Christmas presents and, obviously Lane Kiffin and the football team are certainly doing their part right now. But anyway, just DM me with anything, and I appreciate everybody's support. And, I think it's going to happen.
Awesome. I'm excited for you. All right, let's talk about Ole Miss and Georgia in Athens. I think you're headed that way. such an opportunity for Ole Miss in my view. I don't really think there's a lot to lose, assuming a win over ULM, assuming a win over Mississippi State. I don't think there's a lot to lose here. And people keep saying, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, look, Alabama, unless Alabama loses to Kentucky and Auburn, and you beat Georgia, you're not going to Atlanta, so you're not playing for the SEC title. It is what it is. Even if you beat Georgia, you got to have a lot of help outside to get into the 14 playoff, which I hate. I hate that. I hate that for everybody.
I know why it's not 12 this year.
I know. It should have been 12 years ago. But regardless, realistically, I think the computer odds were 23% if Ole Miss won out, 23% that it would get into the playoff. That's not great odds. It's not impossible, but it's not great. So a loss isn't the end of the world. A loss, and you go 10-2, assuming, again, that you beat Mississippi State, that you beat ULM. And if you don't win those two games, something drastically happened. Bad. So you're 10-2. You're going to either the Cotton Bowl, the Peach Bowl, or the Orange Bowl. And if I had offered, and I guess perhaps the Fiesta Bowl, I'm not sure how that works out, but an Access Bowl, a New Year's Six Bowl. If I'd said before the season to 100 Ole Miss fans, hey, give or take, here you go, take it or run your chances. If I'd offered you this, Ben, on September the 1st, if I'd said, okay, here's the deal. 10-2, you get to beat LSU, you get to beat Mississippi State. 10-2, and you're going to a New Year's Six Bowl, not a championship bowl, but a New Year's Six Bowl. You can take that, or you can see what's behind door number 2. What would your answer have been?
I'm jumping through the screen to get the 10-2.
There you go.
Because when you looked at realistically before the season, I said 8-4, but I said we'd be a lot better than we were last year, but the schedule was going to get us.
Yeah.
And, things broke right. And I think a lot of it's a testament to what Lane's built in the program. The thing about these Lane teams, like the games Ole Miss is supposed to win, they find a way. And like old school Ole Miss would always lose a couple games they were supposed to win, but would be a feisty underdog. But games like the Arkansas game, look at the history of that series. Like those, we just pulling it out at Auburn. I mean, last week in a game we're all, just finding a way to win, even when, and just that sense of belief too. Like the fan base has always kind of been beat down with Ole Miss, but even when A&M scored to go up 35-31, I was at the Chicago watch party. I looked at everybody. I was like, whatever, we're going to get the ball. We're going to go down and score and win. And just, I feel like everybody feels that way now. There's just like a sense of belief that the Rebels are going to just get it done. And that's something that you have to build in the culture. Drew Brees and Sean Payton built that in New Orleans too. Yep. And it's a real thing. And it's something Ole Miss hadn't had. It's like, instead of like when you're in these close games, instead of being like, oh, how are we going to blow this? You're like mentally like, no, we're going to pull this out. And I think that has a lot to do with Lane and the whole culture.
I do too. I can already kind of hear people going, you said they'd go 8-4. And I'm like, I did. I picked 8-4. And in fact, I said, if you made me hedge a game one way or the other, I'd go 7-5. And at the end of the season, when I look up, I think if this thing goes 10-2, and we'll talk about the Georgia game in just a minute, because I think you and I have different views on this. At 10-2, I'm going to say, well, look at what happened. You played basically a toss-up game with Tulane. It was fourth quarter tied. You played definitely a toss-up game with LSU. I mean, the ball's in the air on the last play of the game to impact the game. You played not a toss-up, but a close game with Arkansas. They led early. They led early in the fourth quarter. You played a interesting game at Auburn. It wasn't a toss-up, but it was an interesting game.
But you went on the road and won in a spot that was dicey.
And you won a toss-up game against Texas A&M. I mean, look, you blocked a field goal that would have sent the game to overtime. That's a toss-up.
No doubt.
On the last play of the game. You won all of those games. That doesn't happen very often, and it only happens, and here's the part that you can't predict before a season. This is why the sports are great. You can't predict in August or in July when we do a lot of this, and you haven't seen a team. You can't go, this team has that special something. You don't know those things. You don't know those things in the preseason. Yeah, fans might go, oh, this team does, but fans say it every year, so that doesn't count. No offense. I'm not criticizing fans. Fans go, every year our team's going to be awesome. My team's going to be awesome. We're going to win. No. Typically, you win half of your toss games, except when you're special. And this team, I'm starting to think, I've got this funny feeling about them. I'm like you. at 35-31, when A&M scored, I remember thinking they're going to drive down the field. The only question I had was, how long will it take? How will they run all the clock off? Are they going to make Jimbo burn the timeouts? That's all I was thinking. There was never a part of me that was like, oh, my God, they're going to lose today. I thought the whole day they were going to win. Even when the blocked field goal, they're going to win. I just thought Ole Miss would win the game. And previous Ole Miss teams that I've covered, they would have wilted. They would have lost that game. They would have been in trouble at Tulane. They would have – LSU would have finished them off. They would have lost one of those Arkansas-Auburn games. We'd be talking about 7-5. This is a different team, and they've proven it. And it's why people push back sometimes why do you guys keep asking, is this team really good? It's that you're kind of missing the point with them. I think what that means is they're not some powerhouse football team. You don't watch them play and go, man, those guys, that is an elite team. No, they're a good team, but they're a good team that seems to play above their heads a little bit because they play with this sense of belief and determination, and they're very mature, and they're older, and they're not easily rattled. They just kind of do their thing, and they're calm. Lane's kind of calm. They follow his lead a little bit, and there's something about them that is an intangible that's unpredictable when you're doing win-loss toss at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, and I think the other thing about it is they can win multiple ways. You know, you win shootouts against A&M and LSU, and then you win defensive games against Arkansas and Auburn. And, you know, what Pete Golding's brought to the defense, I know they didn't have their best effort against A&M, but other than the A&M and LSU games, the defense has been awesome. And then in those games, you had Jackson Dart step up with the offense with Quinn Sean and you know, Trey Harris. And so you can win shootouts, you can win low-scoring games. Like it doesn't have to – you can come from behind, you can play with the lead. They can beat you a lot of ways, and they're comfortable in a lot of situations. And then another thing with Lane too, and this is the key to this game for sure. Ole Miss jumps out to leads almost every week. I mean, like the game script at the beginning, Ole Miss goes and scores on that opening drive, and they're up 7-0, 10-0. Heck, this A&M game, they would have been up 17-0 if they make that field goal. That whole game flipped on A&M's blocked field goal when they ran it back to make it 14-7.
100%.
The key to transition into the Georgia game, Georgia started slow a bunch this year. I don't know if you've seen some games, but, you know, we saw Missouri. Even Florida was up 7-0 before they smoked them.
South Carolina was up 10.
Yeah, South Carolina was up at the half. It seems like Georgia's been starting slow, but then their second half, and Alabama's done this too, they make those adjustments at half, and then they come out and war machine you in the second half. So to me, the key to Ole Miss here is on the road Saturday night. Like, you don't need to jump up 7-0. You need to jump up like 14 or 21-0 and just put them on their heels, take the crowd out of it, because Georgia has started slow and Ole Miss starts fast. And so I hope if Ole Miss wins the toss, they get the ball, they go down there, they score, they set the tone, because the thing with Georgia is, you know, they're going to be – the second half is going to be incredibly tough.
I told you, I've just had this funny feeling about this game. I've had it for weeks that, like, if Ole Miss got to 8-1, that they'd go and play this loose, nothing to lose kind of game. And then on Monday, Lane Kiffin says, yeah, we're playing with house money. And I'm like, exactly. There's no point in putting this pressure on your team. Hey, we're just going to go play. And then I listen to players. I've been around these guys, and I can tell that they're not intimidated. They're excited about the opportunity. They get to show on national TV against the best team in the country, the two-time defending champ, all of that stuff. I don't think the moment's going to be too big. I think for some teams, the moment gets big. I thought for Missouri in the second half, the moment got big. I don't sense that that's going to happen with this team. I'm not saying Ole Miss is going to win. I'm picking Georgia to win. But I've got this funny feeling about the game. And look, people get mad when I say this, but I think it's one of the reasons that I do a decent job on the beat. I'm not an emotional fan about this. I'm not. It doesn't matter. I mean, you know what I mean? I mean, I hope for Ole Miss fans that you guys get it, but it doesn't. I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. So I've just got this funny feeling from covering this team that something that they're going to be in this thing. I really do. I don't think this is going to be one of those games where, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But I don't think it's one of these games where Georgia shows up and goes, no, we're going to show the world. Here we go. We're going to win by 27. I don't see that happening.
Well, my thing with it is I'm obviously an Ole Miss fan and a homer, but like I analyze football from the gambling standpoint. So I just tell it like I see it. I mean, I didn't like us against Arkansas laying the points. I was worried about us at Auburn. I mean, I'm always going to just tell you what I really think.
Yeah.
What concerns me about it's good that Brock Bowers is still out. What concerns me about this one is when you look at Georgia's season, they got super up twice this year for that Kentucky CBS game, and they beat them 51-13, and then they had a bye week before Florida, and they massacred Florida. I think Ole Miss is a lot better than Kentucky and Florida. I don't think that's news to anyone. But I don't know that Georgia, like, they got up for Florida. I think last week against Missouri, like, I know it was a 2:30 CBS game, but, like, maybe that wasn't their best effort. I think we're getting a huge Georgia effort here on Saturday night at home against Lane in a top 10 matchup. And so I feel like this, what concerns me is this is a spot where we're going to be running into, like, the full bore, not half sleep Georgia. But having said that, that doesn't mean Ole Miss can't compete. You know, when you look at Georgia this year, they're obviously number one in the country, but they're not as good as they were the last couple of years. And it's because Todd Monken and Bennett were way better than people ever gave them credit for. And Monken's now with the Ravens. I'm not a big Mike Bobo fan. I've criticized him a lot on here. I don't think he's a very good offensive coordinator. And, you know, Beck at quarterback, I mean, he's pretty – I'm not saying he's not good, but he's just not elite. The thing with Ole Miss is, can the run defense hold up? Because A&M ran it kind of pretty good on us. And, you know, Georgia's going to come out and try to pound it. But I think if Ole Miss jumps out early, like I think they could with how the Rebels tend to, I think it could be a game into the fourth quarter. And that's all you can really ask for, I think, in this situation. I do think this, if they get down like 14-0 to Georgia, we're huge trouble. It's all about jumping on them early with the crowd thing and the fact that Ole Miss has the fast starts and Georgia has the slow ones. So I honestly think if you like Ole Miss gambling here, instead of taking the plus 11 in the game, I hadn't seen a first half line yet. I would rather take plus 6.5 or plus 7 first half than the plus 11 in the game. Because like, even look at the Alabama game. Ole Miss was winning 7-6 at half. And I think when you look at Kirby Smart and Saban, you get these halftime adjustments and these second half efforts are real problems. So if you like Ole Miss, I'm going to suggest maybe betting the first half instead of the game.
And I just always remind people about this Alabama game. And it happened. Look at the way the schedule works. You don't get to use this as an excuse at the end of the year to position yourself for better placement. It's not football. I mean, you're gonna play teams at some point. You're gonna play teams banged up, and sometimes you're gonna play a team when you're banged up. It's part of the game. It is what it is. But they didn't have Trey Harris that day. He was there, but he wasn't really there. And Caden Prieskorn, it was his first game, and he was super rusty. Like there was rust falling off of him as the game went on. I mean, you could literally almost see rust. And without those two guys, they didn't have a passing game going. Quinshon Judkins wasn't 100%. There was the offensive line wasn't particularly confident. They kind of got one-dimensional. You don't beat Alabama with a one-dimensional team. You just don't. And so, but I don't throw that game away again. It was what it was. It was on the schedule. Alabama showed up, so did Ole Miss, and Alabama won the game. But I don't take a lot from it going forward to Georgia, where you're going to have Trey Harris, you're going to have Caden Prieskorn, your offensive line's playing a lot better, with a lot more confidence. Quinshon Judkins is healthy and playing really well. Feels like you're at your best at this point as you get ready for Georgia, and I do think that's to be noted.
Yeah, and also just different football team in November than late September. I mean, that's the thing with football. You're evolving and changing all the time. And, you know, that's what's interesting about Ole Miss is, like, historically pretty good early in the year and not peaking in November. But this year it seems to be kind of the opposite. And, look, they're confident. I think the biggest point you made, I texted with Kelvin Bolden yesterday, and he said the same thing. He's like, man, we got nothing to lose. We can't wait to just get the show out under the lights, let it fly. You know, like, there's no pressure. I mean, if we're going to a PCS Bowl, if we lose, it's just an ultimate free roll. And so
it is, because you get ULM next week, right? I mean, nothing against ULM. You and I both have strong. We have strong. I mean, we both have real strong Monroe ties. Both of my parents went to Neville, and they both went to what is now ULM. And my uncle Alton played quarterback at ULM. I love ULM. I mean, I do. I make fun of it all the time.
I think this may be the end of the Terry Bowden era. I'm hearing possibly.
Probably so, but I had a great experience at ULM. It was a lot of fun. I made a lot of friends at Monroe. I played at Ruston. We played West Monroe, Neville, Ouachita. Those were the teams we played all the time. You grew up in that area.
Oh yeah, I grew up going to all those games.
I'm not criticizing. But here's the great point. Here's the great part for Ole Miss is that last year after that Alabama game, they had to go to Arkansas, and you had to play a good team, not a great team, but Arkansas was fine, and they played their game of the year, and they punched you in the mouth right off the top, and you just couldn't answer. Look, You're not going to get punched in the mouth by ULM. You're going to get a cakewalk. Even if you get beat and you're kind of licking your wounds a little bit, you don't play another real game for 12 days. So you get through ULM, you go beat Mississippi State, and you go to a big bowl, you recruit, and you build from there, and you get ready to go into a season with a 12-team playoff. It's different than last season where there was still meaningful football. That was tough games left.
Yeah, and we're not dealing with the Lane Kiffin to Auburn stuff right now either.
Exactly.
That really was a tough deal.
This is free shot. This is a chance to show off on national TV and to also, hey, look, going into next season, it's an opportunity at a barometer. How far away are you from the elite? Lane always says there's a big.
Looking at, I'm not like the biggest recruiting junkie, but it's hard to not see all the top Mississippi players are heading to Ole Miss. I think even seeing Braylon Burnside, the receiver, decommitting from Mississippi State, and from Starkville High, he's been up visiting. You already got 5 of the top 7 players, so it certainly seems like things are trending in the right direction in every way. And also just shout out, I'm part of the Grove Collective stuff, the Brick Watch stuff. I think our NIL crew is batting so far above our weight. We're going toe-to-toe with LSU and Auburn and getting people, and I think that Walker Jones and everybody's been really creative. Shout out to Tyler Jordan at Realtree. I think everybody's like being very open-minded and creative, and Lane's super creative about it. And I think we're, going toe-to-toe with fan bases that have way more money and way bigger because of it. So I think that's part of it too.
Let's touch on some other games. Get your thoughts on gambling things. The other big national game besides Ole Miss at Georgia is Michigan at Penn State. Michigan's a 4.5-point favorite at Penn State. What are your thoughts there?
I just can't trust James Franklin in these big games. If this game was at Michigan, I think I'd take Michigan. You know how I am on the road favorite thing. It's just not my thing. So I'm probably staying away. The over-under's low at 45.5, but I could see it being lower scoring. Penn State's offense, their receiving core is really bad. I asked some Penn State people, is Drew Aller good or not? And they're like, look, he's not bad. His receiving core is just really, really bad. No one's on the same page. But I do think Penn State has a good defense. Look at that Ohio State-Penn State game. It was like 20-6. So I expect Penn State's defense to fight super hard at home. I don't know if Penn State can score enough points. So if I take anything, I'm taking the under small. But the problem is 45.5. You're not dealing with like a very big number.
Alabama goes to Kentucky. Alabama, a 10.5-point favorite in Lexington. Any thoughts?
I actually have a strong play on this. It's the over-unders. I think I saw 48.5. Maybe it's 47.5 now.
48.
No, it's 48.5. That's what I'm saying. This reeks to me of Bama having the big LSU win, and now you got an 11 a.m. road game against a Kentucky team. Look, I don't think Kentucky has enough offense to win this game, but they're going to play hard as hell on defense. And this being an 11 a.m. game, kind of I could see a slower start from Bama. I think Bama wins this game 24-10. Something 24-13. Maybe Kentucky hangs in the first half, but I'm looking at the under 48.5 because I think the under sets up really good off the 42-28 Bama shootout where everybody saw Milroe go nuts. But that's an indictment. That's a whole nother rant entirely. I don't know how Matt House didn't put Harold Perkins' spy on Milroe last week when he was running all over him. I was like, anybody that was watching that game from their couch knew he should. But regardless of that, I like the under in Bama, Kentucky. I think Bama gets out of there with kind of like one of those 24-10, lazy 11 a.m. sluggish games, and they get on with their lives.
There's not a ton on the slate here that's super interesting. You got Georgia Tech plus 14 at Clemson, Texas.
I like Georgia Tech there. Tech's been fighting, and you kind of mentioned it. Ole Miss, winning at Tulane and beating Georgia Tech at home, Tech's been playing good. They beat North Carolina. They beat one at Miami on that crazy ending. Haynes King kind of seems like a winner. They're getting 14.5. I expect that to be a game into the fourth quarter. Tech historically fights against Clemson. It's a long shot money line at plus 450, but I like the points and maybe the money line small. Just Tech is fighting really, really hard. And, Clemson, I was on them last week against Notre Dame in a bounce back spot, but I don't think that necessarily is like Clemson's back. I just thought that game set up really good for them to have a bounce back win. And, I think the thing with football gambling that I hope people are seeing is it's a week-to-week thing. Every week's different situations, different setups. Don't overrate what you saw last week because I think that's a big fallacy people make.
I kind of like Kansas minus the 3.5 at home against Texas Tech. Texas Tech's one of those teams at home. They're one thing. On the road, they're different. And Kansas is sort of the same way.
20 minutes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, 10 minutes. Fine. I'll be done in the next 10 minutes. All right. The Kansas-Texas Tech thing, I thought the line should be 7 because Texas Tech has really struggled on the road. They lost at BYU. They hadn't won a road game this year, I don't think. They lost to Wyoming to start the year. But what's interesting to me is Kansas. I was wrong last week. I was on Iowa State. It just seems like the power ranking on them for Vegas is low because I guess their recruiting's bad. But Lance Leipold is just, and it's,
Just terrific.
What he did, what he inherited Kansas after the Les Miles thing. They were like no wins. But I like Kansas in that game. I just, I really do. I'm on them. I think they should win by 2 touchdowns.
All right, not going to keep you a lot longer because we're only going to run through.
Okay, we'll sprint through it.
We'll sprint through all of this. Tennessee -1.5 at Missouri.
Missouri or nothing. Missouri's got a weird home field advantage, but people always hate on me, Tennessee fans, because it seems like I bet against them every week.
The Arkansas line's down to 2.5 at home against Auburn in a game that I think is really important for Sam Pittman.
I can't figure that one out. I do like that Arkansas got rid of Dan Enos because he stunk, and you saw the offense look better. But Auburn kind of quietly 5-4, look good against Mississippi State and Vandy. They might be closing strong toward a bowl game, so I don't have an opinion.
Florida's a 14-point dog at LSU.
That one I do. So LSU just had the Bama thing. You just talked about it with Ole Miss. LSU, all their preseason hopes are gone now. LSU-Florida is usually a really wonky, weird rivalry game. I think 14's a lot. Jaden Daniels, concussion protocol, I think he's going to play, but if he doesn't play, I like Florida. I know Florida's not that good with Nate, but this is still Napier. He's trying to fight for his job. He wanted the LSU job from ULL. This just feels like a game where, I don't know, I wouldn't take LSU.
Mississippi State getting 19 on the road at Texas A&M. Speaking of quarterback issues, nobody really knows what's going to happen at A&M with their quarterback play.
I wonder how long. I don't know what's going on with A&M thing, but Mississippi State, they can't score. It's really bad. 3 points against Kentucky. I'm hearing all kinds of stuff. I know Arnett's not going to be coaching next year. I wonder if he's even going to be coaching the Egg Bowl at this point from some of the stuff I've been hearing behind the scenes.
Heard that rumor.
Yeah, I've been hearing some rumors about the Mississippi State situation. So it's just weird. I don't want to lay 19 when the over-under is only 43. The margin for error is too small, so I'm staying away from it.
Am I crazy to like Oregon -15 against Southern Cal? I think Oregon's
I love Oregon. I love Oregon. I think it's going to be a bloodbath. I think USC just had their Waterloo at home against Washington. That was everything they had. They fired Alex Grinch. Maybe they play harder for a new defensive coordinator, but I don't know that they can learn how to tackle in a week. I don't know that they can learn how to not blow coverages. They're always out of position. It's embarrassing. And you got to think on the Oregon side of it. They're trying to make the playoffs with one loss. USC's a national brand. This is Caleb Williams against Knicks. Knicks trying to win the Heisman. If they can run it up here, they're going to run it up. They're going to try to beat them. Notre Dame beat USC 48-20 at home. I think you're looking at a similar situation here. I think it gets bloody.
All right, we're going to roll through the NFL fast because there's not a lot.
Okay, one other college one.
Okay.
Central Florida +2.5 against Oklahoma State. Rat line of the year. Oklahoma State just won their Super Bowl in Bedlam in the final Bedlam rivalry game. Now they got to go to Central Florida, who's kind of struggled. It's only 2.5. I smell something really weird, and I like Central Florida in that game. All right, NFL.
All right, interesting. All right, Colts at the Patriots. Colts laying 1.5.
This is in London. Colts are nothing just because they hate the Pats, but I don't have much.
Okay. Interesting game here. Texans off that big win. They go to Cincinnati this week. The Bengals are playing really well. Cincinnati laying 7.
I do like what C.J. Stroud's doing. Don't get me wrong, but I ain't going against what I'm seeing out of Cincinnati right now. Period.
Okay,
they're on one. Burrow's playing great.
Rivalry game. The Browns go to Baltimore. Browns getting 6.
I like Cleveland +6 here. I think you just mentioned it with the rivalry game. You got a 37 over/under. I think you got one of those low-scoring AFC North slugfests, and 6 is a lot of points in what I think is a 2017 or 16-13 type game. So give me the dog.
All right, probably the most interesting game of the week. The Niners go to Jacksonville. The Niners a 3-point favorite on the road in Jacksonville.
This one is – both are off buys. The Niners had all those injuries in Cleveland 3 weeks ago, and now they're getting Debo, and I think Trent Williams is coming back, so they should be healthier. They had the bye week to regroup, but Jacksonville's hot. I'm giving you a long speech about how I have no idea in this football game.
Okay.
I do have one. I think you skipped Green Bay, Pittsburgh. I want to comment on that real quick.
No, I'm getting to it.
Okay, cool. Okay, cool.
Saints at the Vikings. The Saints laying 2.5 on the road against Josh Dobbs and the Vikings.
What a comeback, baby. I will say this. My Taylor Heineke over theory last week, which I was preaching all year, 31-28 final, went over by 22 points. I just want to – anyway, that was literally – I've been talking about that since week 1. I hate the 2.5-point road favorite. It's a rat line. Maybe lean to over just because the Saints are kind of playing better on offense right now. And the Vikings secondary absolutely stinks. So maybe I go over.
Okay. Packers +3 at Pittsburgh.
All right, we got a new system. If Jordan Love's playing quarterback, we're betting under. That's the system, period. Unders are 7-1 or 8-1. He has one over so far. This thing's 38.5. The over-under should be 33 or 34 in this game with the way these two offenses looked. I mean, you never know. I mean, turnovers and stuff, crazy stuff could happen. But if the turnovers don't get out of control, you're looking at like a 16-10 Steelers win here.
Okay.
I like the under a lot.
Titans go to Tampa. The Titans, what a dog of the game. Titans getting a point on the road.
I got nothing next.
The Lions head to L.A. Lions laying 2.5 in Los Angeles.
I like the over here. I think this game could get a little wild in LA. I could just kind of it's 48.5. I kind of, especially the Chargers coming off that lower scoring Monday night game. I don't know why. I just feel like this is like, there's always like a sneaky NFL game that can get wild.
And here's the other thing, like road dogs applied, but not when you play the Chargers in LA. They don't have a
the Lions will have 60% of fans.
Yeah. I kind of like Detroit there. The Falcons laying 1.5 at Arizona.
Well, I told you this Heineke over theory. Notice it went from 37 to 42.5 off last week. So it's hard to be ahead of the books on stuff. Like, that's why I take pride in this. But I think Kyler Murray's going to start this week. And if Kyler Murray goes, we're banging this over again. Kyler Murray against Heineke. This one could get wild too. But I think Murray's going to go. But if Kyler Murray does go, because we're taping this early in the week, I'm going over big.
The Giants, a 16-point dog. You don't see this in the NFL. A 16-point dog at Dallas.
Tyrod Taylor, Jones tore his ACL. Look, they lost 14-9 at Buffalo as like a 17-point dog a couple weeks ago. I'm not laying 16 in pro football, so I'm Giants or nothing.
Okay. Commanders getting 6 at Seattle. That's interesting.
No idea on this one. Next.
Okay. Jets go to the Raiders. The Raiders played really well last week with the interim coach. Jets laying a point.
I like the Raiders here. I just think, like you said, the Raiders hated Josh McDaniels. Now they're playing hard. I don't trust Zach Wilson on the road. Can't believe this is a Sunday night game, though. Ridiculous.
The Monday night game's a dog, too. Denver goes to Buffalo. The Broncos getting 7.5.
Buffalo keeps playing bad, but at some point they got to beat the crap out of some bad team because they usually do that at home, and Denver seems like an ideal candidate for that.
All right, last thing. We started with Ole Miss. We'll finish with Ole Miss. You're in your gut, how does it play out?
In my gut, how it plays out, I think Ole Miss does get up early because the Georgia slow start thing, and I think that is going to keep Ole Miss in the game to the fourth. And I think it's a game into the fourth that Ole Miss could win, but I'm going to say like Georgia comes back in the second half and nips us, but Ole Miss fights real hard. I'll say like 31-24 Georgia, something like that.
All right. Hey, I know you're busy. Appreciate your time so much. Enjoy your time in Chicago. Enjoy the trip.
I will. I'm telling y'all, everybody that's been following this since I got hired, I mean, we've built to here. Everything right now is the most positive. I can't. I'm just very grateful for the support. But great. This is about to be. There have been a lot of good eras. This is about to be the best one.
I'm happy for you, my man. Talk to you next week.
All right. Thanks, Neal.
That does it for this extra edition of the Oxford Exxon podcast. Hope you enjoyed it. Thought it was 3 great guest joins. Thanks to all of them. Mike Griffith, Radi Nabulsi, Ben Mintz, as always. Really appreciate those guys giving us time here at MPW Digital. We'll have this up in podcast form on Friday morning. If you're making the trip over to Athens, this can entertain you part of the way. Lots of podcasts your way. Please hit the like button on YouTube. Hit the subscribe button on YouTube. Doesn't cost you a thing. If you are listening on Spotify, on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, whatever the case may be, subscribe, hit the like button, leave a 5-star comment. Even if you say something horrible, hit 5-star. We love that. It would do us a lot of favors. Also, if you're listening and you just need something else to listen to, recommend Pete's Pigskin Preview. Watch that on YouTube. Listen to it on podcast form. We'll get you ready for Georgia and Ole Miss. Some hardcore football. The opposite of that, have a little lighthearted football. You can listen to The Butcher versus the Dance Instructor presented by LB's Meat Market. That show up in podcast form as well on Friday. So you can get the weekly picks from Greg Jones of LB's Meat Market, Caroline McCready, my daughter, who's a dance instructor in Northwest Arkansas, in addition to her being a student. So fun show. They pick games each week, so they have a good time. We have a good time with that. That's available for you, as well as is our Thursday visit with Jeffrey Wright on the Oxford Exxon podcast, and much more. And again, on Saturday, we'll have a post-game show brought to you by Dead Soxy. That'll be on YouTube live, and then we'll put it up in podcast form immediately thereafter. And then next week, we'll be back with another full week of podcast here on MPW Digital and coverage at rebelgrove.com. So have a great weekend. Thanks for being a loyal listener, a loyal viewer. We certainly appreciate it. I hope all of you drive safely and look forward to seeing you next time. Until then, good night.